Hey, ambitious souls. Tonight we dive into the world of Dante Volkov, a Russian-born billionaire who conquered Wall Street with the same savage precision he uses to rule his pack. But when a fiery corporate lawyer threatens to expose his empire's darkest secrets, he'll discover that some battles can't be won with money or claws. In this game of power and passion, the hunter becomes the hunted, and surrender has never tasted so dangerous. Chapter 1. Steel and Shadows. The 42nd floor of Volkov Tower gleamed like a predator's den, all black marble, floor-to-ceiling windows, and the intoxicating scent of power that clung to every surface. Dante Volkov stood silhouetted against the Manhattan skyline, his 6'4" frame radiating the kind of authority that made grown men sweat and senators return his calls within the hour. The Koreans are being difficult, Marcus Chun, his chief financial officer, reported from across the mahogany conference table that could seat 20 but felt intimate when Dante's presence filled the room. Dante didn't turn from the window. At 34, he built an empire worth $12 billion, but tonight his enhanced hearing caught something more interesting than quarterly projections, the rapid heartbeat of someone trying very hard not to be afraid. "Define difficult," he said, his Russian accent threading through perfect English like silk over steel. "They want additional environmental impact studies. They're questioning our expansion into the Pacific Northwest territories." Territories. The word hung in the air with deliberate weight. Marcus was one of the few humans who knew exactly what Dante protected in those ancient forests, though he'd never say it aloud. Some secrets were worth more than money. And Dante's voice dropped to that dangerous register that made his pack's wolves whimper and his competitors reconsider their life choices. "They've hired outside counsel. Sterling and Associates. The lawyer arrives in an hour." Now Dante turned, pale green eyes catching the city lights like a wolf's in darkness. His tailored Armani suit couldn't disguise the predator beneath. Broad shoulders, lean muscle, and hands that could snap necks as easily as they signed billion-dollar contracts. "How outside?" Marcus consulted his tablet, swallowing hard. Harvard Law Review. Top of her class. Previously worked corporate mergers for Goldman Sachs before going independent. Reputation for being uncompromising. Her. Isabella Sterling. 29. No family connections to worry about, no political allegiances we can leverage. She built her firm from nothing in 3 years. Marcus paused. "Sir, her success rate in blocking corporate expansion is 93%. Dante's smile could have cut glass. In his world, challenges came in two forms, those that could be bought and those that could be eliminated. He was looking forward to discovering which category Miss Sterling fell into. "Show her up when she arrives. I'll handle this personally." Marcus gathered his papers with the efficiency of a man who'd learned not to question his alpha's decisions. "Sir, perhaps James should sit in? Legal counsel might be." Marcus. The name came out as a low growl that vibrated through the glass walls. "Of course. I'll have her brought directly to your office." Alone again, Dante moved to the bar cart where a bottle of Macallan 1946 waited, worth more than most people's houses and perfect for intimidating opposing counsel. He poured 2 fingers, inhaling the complex scent while his enhanced senses catalogued every detail of his domain. This office had seen the destruction of competitors, the signing of treaties that redrew territorial lines both corporate and supernatural, and the kind of negotiations that decided the fate of packs across 3 continents. Isabella Sterling was about to discover what happened when someone threatened his empire. The elevator's soft chime announced her arrival 30 minutes early. Dante approved. Punctuality suggested either confidence or fear, and both could be useful. His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Mr. Volkov, Miss Sterling is here. Send her in." The double doors opened with whisper-quiet precision, and Dante's world tilted on its axis. Isabella Sterling walked into his office like she owned it, and everything in Dante's supernatural DNA roared to attention. She stood 5'8" in Louboutin heels that brought her closer to his eye level, with mahogany hair swept into a perfect chignon that showed off the elegant line of her neck. Her charcoal suit was tailored to perfection, hugging curves that belonged in bedrooms, not boardrooms, but her dark blue eyes held the kind of intelligence that could dismantle his empire stone by stone. She was beautiful, yes, but beauty was common in his world. What made his wolf pace restlessly behind his human facade was the complete absence of fear in her scent. Where others brought anxiety and desperation, she carried confidence and something else, something that made his nostrils flare and his hands clench. Challenge, Mr. Volkov. Her voice was honey over broken glass, sweet enough to draw you close, sharp enough to cut. Thank you for seeing me. She moved across the office with fluid grace, her gaze taking in the luxury that was meant to intimidate. The original Picasso, the handcrafted furniture, the view that cost him $800 million. Instead of being impressed, she looked calculating. Ms. Sterling. He gestured to the chair across from his desk, but she remained standing. Interesting. Drink. I don't drink with adversaries. Adversaries? Dante circled his desk with predatory slowness, noting how her pulse stayed steady even as he invaded her personal space. Most humans instinctively backed away from him, some primal part of their brain recognizing the apex predator wearing a $3,000 suit. Isabella held her ground. I prefer to think of us as negotiating partners. Partners suggest mutual benefit. I'm here to inform you that the Cascade project will not proceed as planned. She opened her briefcase, Italian leather, he noted, and expensive, withdrawing a thick folder. When she set it on his desk, her fingers were perfectly steady. Environmental protection laws, indigenous rights violations, and zoning restrictions that your team somehow overlooked. Any one of these issues would tie up your project for years. Together? She tilted her head, and candlelight caught in her dark hair. They'll bury it. Dante leaned against his desk, close enough to catch her scent. Jasmine and steel, ambition and secrets. His wolf wanted to crowd closer, to test whether she'd break, but something deeper urged caution. You've done your homework. I always do. Her smile was professional ice with a hint of something warmer underneath. The question is, did you? About you? He let his gaze travel over her face, memorizing the sharp intelligence in her eyes, the full lips that would feel perfect under his mouth. Isabella Sterling. Harvard Law, class of 2018. Summa cum laude. Turned down partnership at 3 white shoe firms to start her own practice. Drives a BMW M5, lives in a Tribeca loft, and hasn't lost a case in 18 months. Something flickered in her expression, surprise, maybe, or approval. You work fast. I work thoroughly. He pushed off from the desk, moving closer until he could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. But my research missed something crucial. Which is? Why someone with your talent is wasting time on environmental law when you could be making real money in corporate acquisitions. Her laugh was rich and genuine, transforming her face from merely beautiful to absolutely stunning. You assume I'm motivated by money. Everyone is motivated by money, Ms. Sterling. The only question is how much. How refreshingly cynical. She stepped closer, and now he could feel the heat radiating from her skin, could see the pulse beating in her throat. But you're wrong about me. Then what do you want? For a moment, silence stretched between them, thick with tension and possibility. Her eyes searched his face like she was looking for something specific, and Dante had the unsettling feeling she might actually find it. Justice, she said finally. The communities you're displacing deserve better than your lawyers' empty promises. The ecosystems you're destroying took centuries to develop. And the wildlife in those territories needs protection from developers who see nothing but profit margins. The way she said wildlife made his supernatural instincts prickle. Did she know? Impossible. His secrets were locked tighter than Fort Knox, protected by NDAs worth more than small countries' GDP. Noble, he murmured, moving closer still. But ultimately futile. My project will proceed, Ms. Sterling. The only question is whether you'll be compensated for stepping aside, or whether you'll be steamrolled. Is that a threat? It's a business proposition. She smiled then, and it was sharp enough to cut. Counteroffer, Mr. Volkov. Drop the Cascade project entirely, Donate $50 million to Pacific Northwest conservation efforts, and I won't expose the rather interesting connections between your shell companies and several extinct logging operations. Dante went very still. Those connections were buried under layers of corporate structure so complex that even the IRS had given up trying to trace them. The fact that she'd found them meant she was either incredibly good at her job or she had help from someone who knew exactly what to look for. You're playing a dangerous game. I play to win. She closed her briefcase with a soft snap. You have 48 hours to consider my offer. After that, I file with the EPA, the State Attorney General, and several federal agencies that would love to take a closer look at how you've acquired so much virgin territory so quickly. She turned to leave, and every instinct Dante possessed screamed at him to stop her, not just because she threatened his business, but because watching her walk away felt wrong in a way that had nothing to do with corporate strategy. Miss Sterling. She paused at the door, looking back over her shoulder. This isn't over. No, she agreed, her blue eyes holding his with unflinching intensity. It's just beginning. The door closed behind her with a soft click that echoed through the office like a gunshot. Dante stood frozen, his enhanced hearing tracking her movement through the building, the confident click of her heels on marble, the whisper of the elevator doors, the rumble of the engine as her car pulled away from the curb. Only when her scent had completely faded did he allow himself to acknowledge what his wolf had been howling since the moment she walked in.
Mine.
He'd built his empire by taking what he wanted and destroying what stood in his way. But Isabella Sterling wasn't a company to be acquired or a competitor to be eliminated. She was something far more dangerous, a woman who could bring down everything he'd built, and the only person in 20 years who'd made him question whether victory was worth the price. Dante reached for his phone, speed-dialing Marcus. Sir, I want everything on Isabella Sterling. Everything. Financial records, client lists, personal relationships, parking tickets. If she's ever jaywalked, I want to know about it. Already on it. But sir, what if she's clean? Dante stared out at the city lights, his reflection a dark silhouette against the glass. In the distance, a siren wailed, the sound of someone's world falling apart. Then I'll make her dirty. Chapter 2. Shadows and Silk. The Meridian Club occupied the top 3 floors of the Chrysler Building, and membership cost more than most people earned in a decade. Dante had bought his way and not for the prestige. He had enough of that, but because it was the perfect hunting ground for information. 24 hours had passed since Isabella Sterling had walked out of his office, and his investigators had turned up exactly nothing useful. Clean financial records, impeccable professional reputation, and a personal life so carefully guarded it was practically hermetic. Which meant she was either a saint or exceptionally good at hiding her sins. She's a ghost, Marcus reported, sliding a tablet across the leather booth where Dante sat nursing his second glass of Hennessy parody. The club's main dining room hummed with the quiet conversations of Manhattan's elite, senators, CEOs, and the occasional foreign minister, all speaking in the careful tones of people who knew their words shaped markets. No one is a ghost in the digital age. Isabella Sterling is. No social media presence beyond a professional LinkedIn. No public relationships. She owns her apartment outright. Paid cash 3 years ago. Her law firm's client list is sealed tighter than classified documents. Dante's jaw tightened. He'd crushed hostile takeover attempts, outmaneuvered federal regulators, and once stared down the alpha of the East Coast's largest pack until the bastard submitted. But one human female lawyer was proving more elusive than all of them combined. What about her background? Family? Parents died in a car accident when she was 16. No siblings. She put herself through Harvard on academic scholarships and took out minimal student loans, which she paid off within 2 years of graduation. Foster care, private boarding school, full scholarship. Before that, Marcus hesitated. Before that, what? The records are sealed. Juvenile Protection Services. Whatever happened before she was 16, someone very powerful wanted it buried. Dante's enhanced senses picked up the shift in Marcus's scent, anxiety laced with something that might have been fear. His CFO had been with him for 8 years, long enough to know when his alpha was losing patience. Find out what happened. Sir, sealed juvenile records require federal court orders. Then get a federal court order. Dante's voice carried the kind of authority that had made senators change their votes and made rival alphas bare their throats. Or find another way. I don't care if you have to bribe a judge or seduce a clerk. I want to know what Isabella Sterling is hiding. Marcus nodded, but something in his expression made Dante pause. His CFO was ambitious and ruthless, qualities Dante valued, but he wasn't stupid. And right now, he looked like a man watching his boss make a potentially catastrophic mistake. What? Sir, with respect. Why does it matter? Her lawsuit is a nuisance, but we have lawyers who specialize in environmental challenges. We could tie this up in appeals for years while the project proceeds. It was a reasonable question. A logical question. The kind of question Dante would have asked himself a week ago, before dark blue eyes and honey steel voice had rewired something fundamental in his brain. She found connections that should have been impossible to find. That suggests either unprecedented skill or inside information. Either way, she's a threat that needs to be neutralized. It was a perfectly rational explanation that had absolutely nothing to do with the way his wolf had been pacing restlessly since she'd left his office, or the dreams that had kept him awake for 2 nights running, dreams of Jasmine and Silk, of her voice whispering his name in the darkness. Marcus accepted the explanation with a nod, but Dante caught the subtle shift in assent. His CFO was many things, but he wasn't a fool. He knew obsession when he saw it. There is one more thing, Marcus said, consulting his tablet. She'll be at the Blackwood Foundation Gala tomorrow night. The Blackwood Foundation, old money, older secrets, and the kind of guest list that read like a who's who of people who could destroy governments with a phone call. Dante had received his invitation months ago, but had planned to skip it. Charity galas were tedious affairs, full of peacocking and hollow conversation. Now they represented opportunity. RSVP yes. And Marcus. Dante finished his drink, savoring the burn of alcohol that couldn't touch his supernatural metabolism. Make sure I have a table near hers. The Plaza Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. If fairy tales featured baccarat crystal chandeliers, $40,000 floral arrangements, and champagne that cost more per bottle than most people's rent. Dante moved through the crowd with practiced ease, his custom Tom Ford tuxedo drawing appreciative glances from society wives and calculating looks from their husbands. He'd been hunting for 30 minutes, his enhanced senses cataloging every scent and sound in the ballroom, when he finally found her. Isabella stood near the auction display, studying a Monet water lily painting with the kind of focused attention most people reserved for religious experiences. Her gown was midnight blue silk that flowed like water over her curves, with a neckline that was modest enough for high society and seductive enough to make his hands itch with the need to touch. Her hair was down tonight, falling in waves over one shoulder, and when she turned slightly, candlelight caught the diamonds at her throat, a simple strand that probably cost more than most people's cars, but looked almost understated against her skin. She was magnificent, and she was completely alone. Dante approached with predatory patience, noting how conversations quieted slightly as he passed. Power had its own gravitational field, and has pulled everything into its orbit. Admiring the brushwork, he said softly, coming to stand beside her. Isabella didn't startle, another mark in her favor. Instead, she glanced at him with those devastating blue eyes and smiled. Actually, I was calculating how much medical equipment $50 million could buy for children's hospitals. The painting's estimated value? Give or take. She turned to face him fully and up close. He could see the faint shadows under her eyes. Good. He wasn't the only one losing sleep. Mr. Volkov, I should have known you'd be here. Charity galas are perfect hunting grounds for predators. Is that what I am? Her gaze traveled over his face with unsettling intensity. Among other things, before he could respond, she was moving, gliding through the crowd with fluid grace. Dante followed, his wolf bristling at being dismissed, but his human mind appreciating the view. She knew he was following, He could tell by the deliberate way she moved, never quite looking back but always staying just close enough to keep him interested. She led him through the ballroom to the auction tables, where items worth millions were displayed like museum pieces. A weekend in Richard Branson's private island. A walk-on role in the next Marvel movie. A private dinner with a former president. Anything catching your eye? Dante asked, moving to stand beside her at the jewelry display. The exit, she said without missing a beat. Bored already? The evening's barely started. I'm here for the foundation, not the entertainment. She picked up the catalog, flipping through pages without really seeing them. Some of us actually care about the causes we support. Implying I don't. Do you? She looked up at him then, and her expression was genuinely curious. When was the last time you donated to something that didn't come with a tax write-off or a photo opportunity? It was a fair question, and one that caught him off guard. Dante had written checks to dozens of charities over the years, part of maintaining his public image as a responsible corporate citizen. But caring? Actually giving a damn about where the money went? You might be surprised, he said instead of answering directly. I doubt that. But her tone had softened slightly, losing some of its earlier edge. A waiter appeared with champagne, Dom Perignon, naturally, and Isabella accepted a glass while Dante waved him away. Alcohol was pointless when your metabolism burned through it faster than it could take effect, and he needed all his senses sharp tonight. Not drinking. I prefer to stay sharp around beautiful women who want to destroy my business empire. Her laugh was soft and genuine. At least you're honest about seeing me as a threat. Should I see you differently? She considered this, sipping her champagne while her gaze drifted over the crowd. That depends. Are you planning to drop the Cascade project? Are you planning to stop fighting me if I don't? Never. The word hung between them, laden with promise and threat. Dante found himself admiring her absolute certainty. In his world, conviction was rarer than diamonds and twice as valuable. Then we have a problem. We have an opportunity. She turned to face him fully, and suddenly the crowded ballroom felt intimate. You could be the first billionaire developer to voluntarily protect an ecosystem instead of destroying it. The publicity value alone would be worth millions. And the precedent? Every environmental group in the country would expect the same treatment. Would that be so terrible? Before he could answer, the lights dimmed and a spotlight illuminated the stage where Victoria Blackwood, heir to a railroad fortune and the foundation's primary patron, approached the microphone. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to our annual gala. The speech was the usual blend of gratitude and guilt, designed to loosen purse strings and consciences in equal measure. Dante barely listened, too focused on the woman beside him. Isabella was paying attention, her expression soft with genuine emotion as Victoria spoke about children in need, about hope being the most precious gift. When the auction began, Dante watched Isabella bid on a weekend at a children's cancer camp. Not the glamorous items that would photograph well, but something that would actually make a difference. She bid carefully, strategically, clearly working within a specific budget. She was outbid in the final moments by a tech mogul who wanted the tax deduction more than the cause. Dante saw her jaw tighten, saw the flash of disappointment before she masked it with professional composure. And before he could talk himself out of it, he was raising his paddle. 100,000. Conversation around their table stopped. The auctioneer looked stunned. Isabella looked furious. What are you doing? She hissed under her breath. Buying a weekend with sick children, apparently. I don't need your charity. It's not charity. It's strategy. He leaned closer, close enough to smell jasmine and determination. Consider it a peace offering. Going once, going twice. Sold to Mr. Volkov for $100,000. Applause rippled through the ballroom, and Dante acknowledged it with a slight nod. But his attention was focused entirely on Isabella, whose blue eyes were blazing with something that might have been fury, or might have been something else entirely. I can't be bought, she said quietly, her voice carrying despite the surrounding noise. I know. And he did know. It was written in every line of her body, every word she'd spoken. Isabella Sterling couldn't be bought, intimidated, or broken. which made her either the perfect enemy or the perfect partner. The question was which one she would choose to be. "Dance with me," he said, standing and offering his hand. "I don't dance with the enemy." Then dance with the man who just donated $100,000 to children with cancer. For a moment, he thought she would refuse. Then she placed her hand in his, and electricity shot up his arm like he'd grabbed a live wire. The orchestra was playing something slow and haunting, Chopin, maybe, or Debussy, and the dance floor was full of couples moving in careful synchronization. Dante led Isabella into their midst, one hand on the small of her back, the other cradling her fingers with surprising gentleness. She fit against him perfectly, her head coming to just below his shoulder, her body warm and pliant despite the tension radiating from every line of her posture. "This doesn't change anything," she said softly, not looking at him. "I know. I'm still going to fight you. I'd be disappointed if you didn't." She looked up then, and something in her expression made his breath catch. "Why? Why what? Why are you making this personal?" It was the question he'd been asking himself for 3 days, the one that had no rational answer. Because she was beautiful? He'd known beautiful women. Because she was intelligent? Intelligence was common in his circles. Because she challenged him? He faced challenges every day. The truth was simpler and more complicated than all of that. From the moment she'd walked into his office, everything else had faded to background noise. His empire, his pack, his carefully constructed life, all of it secondary to the woman in his arms. "Maybe," he said carefully, "because you're the first person in 10 years to look at me and see something other than a bank account." Her step faltered slightly, and for just a moment, her professional mask slipped. Underneath, he glimpsed something vulnerable, a loneliness that matched his own. Then the mask was back, and she was the composed lawyer who wanted to destroy his project. "That's very romantic, Mr. Volkov. But I'm not some starry-eyed debutante who'll melt at the first sign of attention from a powerful man." "No," he agreed, spinning her gently before drawing her back against him. "You're something much more dangerous." The song ended, but they didn't immediately separate. For a heartbeat, they stood motionless in each other's arms while couples swirled around them. Dante could hear her heart beating, could smell the subtle shift in her scent that suggested she wasn't as unaffected as she pretended. Then someone cleared their throat behind them. "Miss Sterling? I thought that was you." Isabella stepped back so quickly she nearly stumbled, and Dante turned to see a man in his 50s approaching, silver hair, expensive suit, and the kind of confident smile that suggested he was used to getting what he wanted. "Judge Harrison," Isabella said, her professional composure snapping back into place. "What a pleasant surprise." "The pleasure is mine. You look radiant tonight." The judge's gaze slid to Dante with barely concealed curiosity. "I don't believe we've been introduced." "Dante Volkov." He extended his hand, noting the slight widening of the judge's eyes. "Good." His reputation preceded him. "Judge Harrison." Federal District Court. The handshake was firm but brief. "Mr. Volkov, I've heard quite a bit about your Cascade project." Warning bells chimed in Dante's head. Federal judges didn't make casual conversation about pending litigation, which meant Judge Harrison either knew something he shouldn't, or he was fishing for information he could use. "All good things, I hope." "That remains to be seen." Harrison turned back to Isabella with a smile that was a little too warm, a little too familiar. "Isabella, I was hoping we might have a chance to catch up. Perhaps over dinner next week." The invitation was professionally phrased, but Dante's enhanced hearing caught the subtle shift in the judge's heartbeat, the faint change in assent. Whatever Judge Harrison wanted from Isabella, it wasn't strictly professional. And every territorial instinct Dante possessed roared to life. "I'm afraid I'll be quite busy next week," Isabella said smoothly. "The Cascade case requires significant preparation." "Of course. Well, perhaps after it's resolved." Harrison's smile didn't waver, but something calculating flickered in his eyes. "I do hope you'll consider all your options carefully, my dear. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that never make it to court." With that cryptic comment, he melted back into the crowd, leaving Dante and Isabella standing alone beside the dance floor. "Friend of yours?" Dante asked carefully. "Professional acquaintance." But Isabella's knuckles were white where she gripped her champagne flute, and her scent carried notes of anxiety and anger. "He presided over my first federal case 3 years ago. And nothing. He's a judge. I'm a lawyer. We occasionally move in the same circles." She was lying not about the facts, but about their significance. Whatever history existed between Isabella and Judge Harrison, it was more complicated than professional acquaintance. "Isabella, I should go." She set down her champagne without drinking it. "Thank you for the dance, Mr. Volkov, and the donation. But this doesn't change anything between us." She was already moving away, her midnight silk gown flowing behind her like water. Dante watched her go, his enhanced hearing tracking her progress through the ballroom even after she disappeared from sight. Judge Harrison's words echoed in his mind. Sometimes the best victories are the ones that never make it to court. It sounded like a threat. Or a warning. Either way, it meant Isabella Sterling was in more danger than she realized. And despite everything, the lawsuit, the threats to his empire, the fact that she could destroy everything he'd built, Dante found himself caring more about her safety than his own interests. Which meant he was either losing his edge, or he'd found something worth more than power. Chapter 3. The Hunt Begins. Dante's penthouse overlooked Central Park from the 58th floor, its floor-to-ceiling windows offering a god's-eye view of the city that never slept. At 3 in the morning, Manhattan glittered like scattered diamonds, but he wasn't admiring the view. He was pacing. His wolf was restless, had been since the moment Isabella Sterling walked away from him at the gala 6 hours ago. Every instinct screamed that she was in danger, that Judge Harrison's veiled threat hadn't been as subtle as the bastard thought. The secure phone on his desk buzzed, the line reserved for pack business. "Speak," he answered without preamble. "Alpha." The voice belonged to Viktor Petrov, his head of security, and the closest thing he had to a brother. "We have a problem." Dante stopped pacing. Viktor didn't call problems problems, unless they involved blood or federal agents. "Talk. Someone's been asking questions about you, specifically about your connection to certain properties in the Pacific Northwest. The Cascade Territories." Dante's jaw tightened. "Who?" "We don't know yet. They're using intermediaries, shell companies, cutouts within cutouts. Professional work. Expensive work. How much do they know?" "Enough to be dangerous. They've connected 3 of your holding companies to land purchases dating back 15 years. They know about the mining rights you purchased and never used. They know about the logging permits you bought and buried." Dante closed his eyes. Those purchases had been strategic, buying up territory around his pack's ancestral lands to create a buffer zone, to protect the wolves under his care from human encroachment. On paper, it looked like a billionaire's environmental activism. In reality, it was survival. Any indication they know about the pack? Not yet. But Alpha, if they keep digging, they'll find the connection between the land purchases and the wildlife preservation trusts. From there, it would be a short leap to discovering that Dante Volkov wasn't just a wealthy developer with environmental interests. He was the alpha of the largest werewolf pack on the East Coast, protector of nearly 300 wolves, and guardian of territories that had belonged to his people for over 2 centuries. Double security around the Cascade properties. "And Viktor? I want to know who's asking questions and why." "Already on it. But, Alpha, there's something else." Dante waited. The question started 3 days ago. 3 days ago. The same day Isabella Sterling had walked into his office and threatened to expose his empire. Coincidence? In Dante's experience, there was no such thing. He ended the call and stood at the windows, staring out at the city that had made him rich and powerful but had never felt like home. Home was the forests of the Pacific Northwest, where his pack ran free under the full moon. Home was the ancient trees that had witnessed his great-grandfather's first transformation, the streams that carried the scent of his ancestors. Home was what Isabella Sterling threatened to destroy with her lawsuit, unless she was working with someone else. Someone who knew enough to ask the right questions, to dig in the right places. Someone like Judge Harrison. Dante reached for his phone again, dialing a number he knew by heart. Marcus? I know it's late. I need you to run a background check on Federal Judge William Harrison. Everything. Financial records, political connections, personal relationships. I want to know if he's ever taken money from anyone with interests opposing mine. Sir? Is this about the Sterling case? It's about protecting what's mine. 20 minutes later, Dante was dressed in black tactical gear and moving through the night like the predator he was. His Lamborghini Huracan ate up the miles between Manhattan and Isabella's Tribeca neighborhood, the engine's growl echoing his wolf's restless energy. He told himself he was conducting reconnaissance, gathering intelligence on a potential threat. The truth was simpler and more dangerous. He needed to see her, to know she was safe, to satisfy the possessive instincts that had been clawing at him since she'd walked away. Isabella's building was a converted warehouse with a kind of understated elegance that cost more than flashy displays of wealth. Dante parked in the shadows across the street and extended his supernatural senses, cataloging every scent and sound in a 6-block radius. Her apartment was on the 4th floor, corner unit with windows facing the Hudson River. The lights were on. She was awake, probably working. He could hear the faint click of computer keys, could catch traces of her jasmine scent on the night breeze. She was alone. Safe.
For now.
But as Dante watched, a black sedan with tinted windows cruised slowly past her building. Government plates. Federal agents, or someone who wanted to look like federal agents. His wolf snarled, and it took every ounce of self-control not to shift and hunt down whoever was stalking his. Not his. Isabella Sterling was many things, beautiful, brilliant, dangerous, but she wasn't his. She'd made that clear enough. The sedan made another pass 20 minutes later, and this time Dante was ready. He followed at a distance, using back streets and his supernatural night vision to track the vehicle without being detected. The sedan stopped 6 blocks from Isabella's building, and Dante watched 2 men get out. One was clearly muscle, thick build, alert posture, the kind of awareness that came from military training. The other was older, wearing an expensive coat and moving with the confidence of someone accustomed to giving orders. Dante couldn't see their faces from his position, but his enhanced hearing caught fragments of conversation. Building secured. She suspects. Judge wants this handled quietly.
Judge.
As in Judge Harrison. Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel. He'd suspected the federal judge was more than a casual acquaintance of Isabella's, but this confirmed it. Harrison had her under surveillance, which meant he saw her as either an asset or a threat. Either way, Isabella was in danger. The 2 men climbed back into their sedan and drove away, but Dante remained in the shadows, watching Isabella's building until the first hints of dawn touched the eastern sky. Only when he was certain the surveillance team wasn't returning did he allow himself to leave. But as he drove back to Manhattan, one thought consumed him. Isabella Sterling had walked into his office 3 days ago and threatened his empire. Now she was being watched by federal agents connected to a judge who'd made veiled threats at a charity gala. Which meant she was either playing a deeper game than he'd realized, or she'd stumbled into something far more dangerous than a simple environmental lawsuit. By 9 a.m., Dante was showered, suited, and sitting in the back of his armored Mercedes as it glided through morning traffic towards Sterling and Associates' offices in Midtown. Sleep was a luxury his supernatural metabolism didn't require, and he'd spent the remaining hours before dawn having Victor dig deeper into Judge Harrison's background. What they'd found was interesting. Harrison had been appointed to the federal bench 8 years ago after a distinguished career in corporate law. He was known for his conservative rulings on business matters and his tendency to side with developers in environmental disputes. His financial disclosure forms showed the usual investments for a man of his position: mutual funds, bonds, a few carefully managed real estate holdings. But Victor had found something else. 3 years ago, Harrison had purchased a vacation home in Jackson Hole, Wyoming. Cash transaction, $23 million, no mortgage. The kind of purchase that raised questions when made on a federal judge's salary. More interesting still was the timing. The purchase had been made 2 weeks after Harrison presided over a case involving Meridian Development, a company that had wanted to build a luxury resort on protected wetlands. The case had been dismissed on a technicality that legal experts had called creative and environmentalists had called corrupt. Meridian Development was owned by a shell company. The shell company was owned by another shell company. And that shell company, buried under 6 layers of corporate structure, was owned by Harrison's brother-in-law. In Dante's world, that was what they called leverage. "Sterling and Associates, sir," his driver announced as they pulled up in front of a sleek glass building that housed some of Manhattan's most prestigious boutique law firms. Dante straightened his tie, Tom Ford, navy silk, perfectly knotted, and checked his reflection in the window. He looked like what he was, a predator in an expensive suit, about to make someone's day very interesting. Sterling and Associates occupied the entire 20th floor, and the elevator ride gave Dante time to center himself, to push down the wolf's possessive instincts and focus on the chess game ahead. Isabella Sterling was brilliant, beautiful, and dangerous. She was also being stalked by federal agents and threatened by a corrupt judge, which made her either his greatest enemy or his most valuable ally. The elevator doors opened to reveal a reception area that managed to be both elegant and intimidating, dark wood, leather furniture, and the kind of quiet that suggested serious money was made here. The receptionist, a polished blonde in her 30s, looked up with professional curiosity. "Mr. Volkov to see Ms. Sterling," he said before she could speak. "I'm afraid Ms. Sterling doesn't have any appointments this morning." "She'll see me." Something in his tone made the receptionist's protest die in her throat. She pressed a button on her phone with hands that trembled slightly. "Miss Sterling? Mr. Volkov is here to see you." "No, he doesn't have an appointment, but—" The voice that came through the speaker was crisp, professional, and carried just a hint of resignation. "Send him in, Monica." "Right this way, sir." Isabella's office was corner suite with windows overlooking the Manhattan skyline, smaller than his but no less impressive. Law books lined one wall, awards and diplomas another. Her desk was clean except for an open laptop, a coffee mug that smelled like expensive espresso, and a single file folder that she closed the moment he walked in. She looked up from her computer with those devastating blue eyes, and Dante felt the familiar jolt of awareness that had been plaguing him for 3 days. Today she wore charcoal gray, a fitted blazer over a silk blouse, her mahogany hair pulled back in a style that was all business, but couldn't hide the elegant line of her neck. "Mr. Volkov, to what do I owe the unexpected pleasure? We need to talk. I believe we covered everything at the gala last night. Did we?" Dante moved to one of the chairs facing her desk but didn't sit. Instead, he leaned against it with deliberate casualness. "Tell me about Judge Harrison." The coffee mug paused halfway to her lips. For just a moment, her professional composure cracked, and he saw something that might have been fear flicker in her blue eyes. "What about him? You tell me." "He seemed very interested in your welfare last night. Almost protective." Isabella set down her coffee with careful precision. "Judge Harrison is a respected member of the federal judiciary. If you're implying something inappropriate—" "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating facts." Dante pulled out his phone and scrolled to a photo Victor had sent him an hour ago. Harrison's vacation home in Jackson Hole, all $23 million worth of rustic luxury. Nice place. Must be nice to afford that on a judge's salary. Her face went very still. "How did you?" "The same way I afford penthouses and private jets. The difference is my money is clean." Isabella stood slowly, her hands flat on the desk. When she spoke, her voice was barely above a whisper. "Get out. Not until you tell me what Harrison has on you." "Nothing. He has nothing on me." "Then why are his men watching your building?" The question hit like a physical blow. Isabella sank back into her chair, the color draining from her face. For a moment, she looked younger, vulnerable, nothing like the composed lawyer who'd threatened his empire. "You're mistaken," she said, but her voice lacked conviction. "Black sedan, government plates, 2 men. They made 3 passes between midnight and 3 a.m. Dante moved around her desk, crowding into her personal space until he could see the gold flecks in her blue eyes. "What does Harrison want from you, Isabella?" She looked up at him, and for a heartbeat, he thought she might tell him the truth. Then her professional mask snapped back into place, and she was the ice-cold lawyer again. Even if what you're saying is true, it's none of your concern. Isn't it? He leaned closer, close enough to catch her scent. Jasmine and fear and something else, something that made his wolf pace restlessly. You walk into my office, threaten my business, and then federal agents start asking questions about my holdings. That makes it very much my concern. What are you talking about? The confusion in her voice was genuine, and Dante felt something cold settle in his chest. Either Isabella was an exceptional actress, or she had no idea that someone had been investigating his connection to the Cascade territories, which meant she was a pawn in someone else's game. Someone's been digging into my business dealings, he said carefully, watching her face for any flicker of recognition. Specifically, my land holdings in the Pacific Northwest. The timing coincides exactly with your lawsuit. That's impossible. I don't have the resources for that kind of investigation, and even if I did, she stopped, her eyes widening as the implications sank in. You think someone is using me? I think you're in over your head. Isabella stood again, this time with purpose. She moved to the window, staring out at the city below while her mind processed the information he'd given her. The Meridian case, she said suddenly. What? 3 years ago. My first federal case. Meridian Development wanted to build a resort on protected wetlands. I was fresh out of law school, working for Goldman Sachs' legal department. The case was supposed to be simple: file an environmental impact objection, negotiate a settlement, everyone goes home happy. Dante waited, sensing she was working through something important. But Harrison threw out the case on a technicality. A technicality so obscure that even my supervising partner was surprised. We lost everything: the wetlands, the wildlife habitat, the Native American burial grounds. Everything. And Isabella turned from the window, and her blue eyes were blazing with anger that transformed her face from beautiful to magnificent. And 6 months later, I found out that Meridian Development was owned by Harrison's family. By the time I could do anything about it, the resort was built and the wetlands were gone. I tried to file a complaint with the Judicial Ethics Committee, but I was just a junior associate with no proof of direct corruption. The pieces fell into place with crystalline clarity. Harrison had used his position to benefit his family's development company. Isabella had tried to expose him and failed. Now, 3 years later, she was fighting another environmental case, and Harrison was making sure she didn't succeed. He's blackmailing you, Dante said. Not blackmailing. Threatening. Isabella moved back to her desk, but she didn't sit. Instead, she stood behind her chair like it was a shield. He made it clear that my career would be difficult if I pursued the ethics complaint, and he's made good on that promise. Cases dismissed on technicalities. Judges recusing themselves at the last minute. Witnesses who suddenly develop memory problems. Why haven't you quit? Gone to work for a bigger firm where you'd have protection? Her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Because Harrison doesn't want me to quit. He wants me right where I am, independent, vulnerable, and dependent on cases he allows me to win. It keeps me quiet about Meridian and gives him a weapon to use when he needs it. A weapon. Think about it, Mr. Volkov. Who better to file a nuisance environmental lawsuit than a lawyer with a reputation for losing important cases at the last minute? Harrison gets to look impartial by letting the case proceed, knowing I'll find a way to sabotage it when the time comes. Dante felt something cold and deadly settle in his chest. Except you're not planning to sabotage it. No, Isabella said, and her voice carried absolute certainty. I'm planning to win. Whatever Harrison thinks he is over me, I'm done playing his games. Even if it destroys your career? Even if it kills me? The words hung in the air between them, loaded with meaning and promise. Isabella Sterling wasn't just fighting for the environment. She was fighting for her integrity, her independence, her right to practice law without corruption. She was fighting for justice. And despite everything, the threats to his empire, the danger to his pack, the fact that her victory could expose secrets that would destroy everything he'd built, Dante found himself respecting her more than he'd. Harrison won't let you win, he said quietly. Then I guess we'll see who's stronger. Him or me. She was magnificent in her defiance, beautiful in her determination. And she was going to get herself killed if someone didn't help her. Before he could talk himself out of it, Dante made a decision that would change everything. What if you had backup? Isabella looked at him suspiciously. What kind of backup? The kind that can make federal judges reconsider their positions. The kind that has resources Harrison can't touch and connections he can't corrupt. You. Me. Why would you help me? I'm trying to destroy your project. Dante moved closer, close enough to see the pulse beating in her throat, close enough to smell the jasmine that was becoming as addictive as any drug. Maybe I've decided there are things more important than business. Such as justice, truth, protecting people who can't protect themselves. Isabella searched his face, looking for deception, for ulterior motives. Dante let her look, keeping his expression open and honest despite the secrets he couldn't share. What's the catch? She asked finally. No catch. Just one condition. Which is, you let me help. No more lone wolf crusader, no more facing this alone. We're partners until Harrison is neutralized. Isabella was quiet for a long moment, weighing her options. Dante could hear her heart beating, could smell the subtle shift in her scent as she made her decision. Partners, she said finally, extending her hand. He took it, and electricity shot up his arm like he'd grabbed a live wire. Her skin was soft and warm, her grip firm and confident. And for just a moment, the professional distance between them evaporated, leaving something raw and honest and dangerous. Partners, he agreed. But even as they shook hands, Dante knew he was lying. He wasn't interested in being Isabella Sterling's partner. He wanted to be her protector, her champion, her mate. And God help anyone who tried to hurt what was his. Chapter 4. Dangerous Territory. The Gulf Stream G650 cut through the afternoon sky at 41,000 feet, its cabin luxury muted by the tension radiating from its two passengers. Isabella sat across from Dante in cream leather that cost more than most people's cars, her laptop open, legal briefs scattered across the polished wood table between them. They were flying to Seattle, neutral territory for what Dante had called a fact-finding mission, and Isabella suspected was something far more dangerous. Tell me again why we need to see the Cascade territories in person, Isabella said, not looking up from her screen. She'd been avoiding direct eye contact since they'd boarded in Teterboro, unsettled by the way her pulse quickened every time those pale green eyes focused on her. Because, Dante said, his Russian accent threading through the words like silk over steel, you can't fight for something you've never seen. And because there are aspects of this case that won't make sense until you understand what we're really protecting. We. The pronoun hung in the air between them, loaded with implications Isabella wasn't ready to examine. 24 hours ago, Dante Volkov had been her enemy, the billionaire developer threatening pristine wilderness for profit. Now he was her partner, the only person powerful enough to protect her from Judge Harrison's corruption. The shift felt too sudden, too convenient. Men like Dante Volkov didn't change sides without compelling reasons, and Isabella had learned the hard way that trusting powerful men led to heartbreak or worse. But she'd also learned to recognize desperation when she saw it. And despite his calm exterior, Dante Volkov was desperate about something. The environmental impact studies are clear, she said, finally looking up from her laptop. Old-growth forest, endangered species, watershed protection. I don't need to see it to argue for its preservation. Environmental impact studies don't capture everything. Dante was staring out the window at the clouds below, his profile sharp and aristocratic against the afternoon light. Some things have to be experienced. Such as? He turned to look at her then, and something in his pale green eyes made her breath catch. Such as understanding why some places are worth more than money. The sincerity in his voice caught her off guard. Isabella had spent 3 days assuming Dante Volkov was motivated solely by profit, a brilliant, ruthless businessman who saw the world in terms of quarterly earnings and market share. But the man sitting across from her spoke like someone who understood loss, who'd fought to protect things that couldn't be quantified in dollars and cents. What aren't you telling me? She asked quietly. Many things. His smile was enigmatic, dangerous. But we're partners now. You'll learn what you need to know when you need to know it. Before Isabella could respond, the pilot's voice crackled through the intercom. Mr. Volkov, we're beginning our descent into Seattle. Weather is clear, visibility unlimited. Thank you, Anton. Dante began gathering the papers spread across his side of the table, documents Isabella hadn't been allowed to see, phone calls he'd taken in rapid Russian during the flight. We'll be staying at the Four Seasons tonight. Tomorrow morning, we drive to the territories. How far? 3 hours north. The property borders Olympic National Forest, but it's been privately owned for over a century. Owned by whom? Dante's smile was sharp enough to cut glass. Me. The Four Seasons Seattle occupied a prime spot on First Avenue, its understated elegance perfect for billionaires who preferred privacy to ostentation. Isabella's suite overlooked Elliott Bay, where ferries moved like graceful ghosts against the darkening water. She should have been reviewing case files, preparing arguments, doing the kind of meticulous legal work that had built her reputation. Instead, she found herself standing at the floor-to-ceiling windows, thinking about pale green eyes and the way Dante's voice changed when he talked about protecting what mattered. A soft knock interrupted her thoughts. Room service, a voice called. Isabella frowned. She hadn't ordered anything, but when she opened the door, she found not a hotel employee but Dante himself, holding a bottle of wine and looking entirely too comfortable in her personal space. What are you doing here? Bringing dinner. He moved past her into the suite without waiting for an invitation, setting the wine on the coffee table. Dom Perignon 1996. I thought we should discuss strategy. Isabella closed the door, acutely aware that they were alone in her hotel room, that he'd shed his jacket and tie sometime since they'd arrived, that the casual elegance of his rolled sleeves and open collar made him look less like a ruthless businessman and more like a man she could trust. Which was exactly why she couldn't trust him. We could discuss strategy in the restaurant, or the bar, or any of the public spaces designed for business meetings. We could, Dante agreed, moving to the windows where she'd been standing. But some conversations require privacy. What kind of conversations? He turned to face her, and the city lights behind him cast shadows across his face that made him look dangerous, predatory. The kind where I tell you that Judge Harrison called the hotel an hour ago, asking about our travel arrangements. Isabella felt ice form in her stomach. How is that possible? I didn't tell anyone. Your credit card. Hotel reservations leave digital footprints, and Harrison has resources. Dante moved closer, and Isabella caught his scent. Expensive cologne layered over something wilder, more primal. He knows we're here, which means he knows we're working together. So, what does that mean for tomorrow? It means we go anyway, but carefully. Dante was close enough now that Isabella had to tilt her head back to look at him. And it means you need to understand exactly what you're walking into. Which is a war that started long before you filed your first legal brief. Before Isabella could ask what he meant, her phone buzzed with an incoming text. She glanced at the screen and felt her blood turn to ice. Enjoying Seattle? Be careful what you hunt for in the forest. Some predators bite back. A friend. Dante was reading over her shoulder before she could close the message, his body radiating tension like a live wire. How did they get this number? I don't know. Isabella's hands were shaking as she set the phone aside. It's a secured line, registered to the firm, not to me personally. Show me your phone. What? Your phone. Now. Something in his voice brooked no argument. Isabella handed over the device, watching as Dante examined it with the expertise of someone who understood surveillance better than any businessman should. Clean, he said after a moment, handing it back. No tracking apps, no malware. Which means they're following your credit cards, your travel bookings, probably your email accounts. Isabella sank onto the couch, the reality of her situation crashing over her like a wave. They know everything. Where I am, who I'm with, what I'm planning. Not everything. Dante sat beside her, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. They don't know why I'm really helping you. Why are you really helping me? He was quiet for a long moment, staring out at the bay where lights reflected off the dark water like fallen stars. "Because some things matter more than money," he said finally. "And because you're brave enough to fight for them even when it might destroy you." The sincerity in his voice was devastating. Isabella had spent 3 years building walls around her heart, protecting herself from men who saw her as a conquest or a threat. But Dante spoke like someone who understood the cost of standing alone against corruption, who recognized the strength it took to keep fighting when the odds were impossible. "This is insane," she said quietly. "I should walk away. Drop the case, take Harrison's money, start over somewhere he can't touch me. But you won't."
"No."
Isabella looked at him then, seeing something in his pale green eyes that made her pulse quicken. "I won't." "Why?" "Because if I walk away from this fight, I'll spend the rest of my life walking away from fights. And that's not who I am." Dante's smile was soft, genuine, nothing like the predatory expressions she'd seen him wear in business settings.
"No."
"It's not who you are." They sat in silence for a moment, the weight of their partnership settling between them. Outside, the city hummed with life. Traffic, voices, the distant sound of fairy horns. But inside Isabella's suite, the world had narrowed to just the two of them. "The wine," Isabella said suddenly, needing to break the tension before it consumed her. "You brought wine." "I did." Dante moved to open the bottle with practiced efficiency, pouring 2 glasses of champagne that caught the light like liquid gold. "To partnerships." "To partnerships," Isabella agreed, accepting her glass. But when their fingers brushed during the exchange, electricity shot through her like lightning. Dante felt it too. She could see it in the way his pupils dilated, in the subtle tightening of his jaw. "Isabella," he said quietly. "Don't." She moved away from him, putting the coffee table between them like a barrier. "Whatever you're thinking, don't." "You don't know what I'm thinking. I know men like you. Powerful, used to getting what you want, accustomed to women falling at your feet." Isabella took a sip of champagne, buying herself time to rebuild her defenses. "I won't be another conquest. Is that what you think this is?" "Isn't it?" Dante set down his wine glass and moved around the table, crowding into her personal space with predatory grace. Isabella backed away until she hit the windows, trapped between cool glass and warm mail. "If I wanted to seduce you," he said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper, "I wouldn't need wine and hotel rooms." "No."
"No."
He braced one hand against the window beside her head, leaning close enough that she could see gold flecks in his pale green eyes. "I'd use the fact that your pulse jumps every time I'm near you, the way you watch my mouth when I talk, the way you lean toward me even when you're trying to push me away." Isabella's breath caught. Every word was true, and they both knew it. "That's not." "It's not what?" Dante's other hand came up to trace the line of her jaw with devastating gentleness. "It's not real? It's not mutual? It's not driving you as crazy as it's driving me?" Isabella closed her eyes, fighting against the tide of want that threatened to drown her. She'd built her career on clear thinking, rational analysis, the ability to separate emotion from logic. But Dante Volkov destroyed her objectivity with nothing more than a touch. "This is a bad idea," she whispered. "Probably. We're business partners. Temporarily. You're still trying to build in protected wilderness." "Actually," Dante said, his thumb brushing across her lower lip, "I'm not." Isabella's eyes snapped open. "What?" "The Cascade Project. I'm withdrawing the development proposal." The words hit her like a physical blow. Isabella stared at him, searching for signs of deception, for the angle she was missing. "Why?" "Because you're right. Some places shouldn't be touched. Some things are worth more than profit." Just like that? Just like that. Isabella wanted to believe him. God, she wanted to believe him. But trusting powerful men had cost her everything once before, and she couldn't afford to make the same mistake twice. "What do you want in return?" Something flickered in Dante's eyes. Disappointment, maybe, or hurt. "Nothing. Everyone wants something. Not from you." He stepped back, giving her space she suddenly didn't want. The project is dead, Isabella. You won. The territories will remain untouched. Isabella studied his face, looking for the lie, for the manipulation she was certain had to be there. But all she saw was sincerity and something that looked like vulnerability. I don't understand. You will. Tomorrow, when you see what we're protecting. Dante moved to the coffee table, finishing his champagne in one smooth motion. Get some rest. We have an early morning. He was almost to the door when Isabella found her voice. Dante. He paused, his hand on the doorknob. Thank you. He looked back at her over his shoulder, and his smile was soft, genuine, nothing like the predatory expressions she'd grown used to. Thank me tomorrow, Solnishko. After you understand what you've saved. The door closed behind him with a soft click, leaving Isabella alone with her thoughts and the lingering scent of expensive cologne and something wilder. Solnishko. Little son. The Russian endearment echoed in her mind as she prepared for bed, as she lay staring at the ceiling listening to the sounds of the city below. Dante Volkov was dangerous, to her case, to her career, to the walls she'd built around her heart. But as sleep finally claimed her, Isabella found herself looking forward to tomorrow, to seeing the territories through his eyes, to understanding what could make a billionaire developer choose preservation over profit. She was walking into dangerous territory in more ways than one. But for the first time in 3 years, she wasn't walking alone. Chapter 5. Blood and Territory. The Range Rover wound through mountain roads that seemed carved from ancient dreams, climbing steadily into the Cascade foothills as dawn painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, mesmerized by the landscape unfolding around them, towering evergreens that had stood for centuries, misty valleys that seemed untouched by human hands, and everywhere the kind of primal beauty that made her understand why people fought wars over territory. Dante drove with the casual confidence of someone who knew these roads intimately, one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gear shift. He'd been quiet since they'd left Seattle, his attention split between the winding asphalt and something Isabella couldn't identify, a tension that seemed to increase with every mile they traveled into the wilderness. How much farther? She asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had settled between them. 20 minutes. Maybe less. Dante downshifted as they rounded a sharp curve, and Isabella caught a glimpse of his profile. Sharp cheekbones, strong jaw, pale green eyes that seemed to see everything. Isabella, before we arrive, there are things you need to understand. What kind of things? He was quiet for so long that Isabella thought he might not answer. Then he pulled into a scenic overlook and killed the engine, turning to face her with an expression that was part determination, part resignation. Get out. There's something you need to see. They stood at the edge of a cliff that offered a panoramic view of the valley below, thousands of acres of old-growth forest stretching to the horizon, broken only by a silver ribbon of river and the occasional meadow where morning mist clung like gossamer. It was breathtaking, pristine, the kind of wilderness that existed now only in protected parks and private preserves. This is it, Dante said quietly. The Cascade Territories. 15,000 acres of forest that's been in my family for over a century. Isabella turned to stare at him. Your family owns all of this? We protect it. There's a difference. We. Dante moved to stand beside her at the cliff's edge, so close that she could feel the heat radiating from his body despite the morning chill. Isabella, what I'm about to tell you will sound impossible, but I need you to listen with an open mind because your life, our lives, depend on you understanding the truth. Something in his voice made her pulse quicken. Isabella had built her career on reading people, on recognizing when clients were hiding crucial information. Dante wasn't hiding information. He was protecting secrets that terrified him. Tell me. The Cascade Territories aren't just forest. They're home to a community that's lived here for generations, people who depend on this land for their survival in ways that go beyond economics or sentiment. Dante paused, his hands gripping the metal railing with enough force to make his knuckles white. People who will die if they're forced to leave. Native Americans? Not exactly. Before Isabella could ask what he meant, The sound of engines echoed from the valley below. She looked down to see a convoy of black SUVs winding through the forest on a road she hadn't noticed before, heading toward what looked like a cluster of buildings nestled among the trees. Who is that? Dante's expression had gone deadly cold.
Trouble.
He was already moving toward the Range Rover, his earlier contemplative mood replaced by something predatory and dangerous. Isabella hurried after him, her heels slipping on the loose gravel. Dante, what's wrong? Those vehicles don't belong here. He started the engine with sharp, economical movements. No one should know about the access road, and certainly not Harrison's people. How do you know they're Harrison's people? Because, Dante said, accelerating down the mountain road with controlled recklessness, I can smell them. Isabella stared at him. You can what? But Dante wasn't listening. He was focused on the road ahead, driving with an intensity that suggested lives hung in the balance. The Range Rover ate up the miles, taking curves that should have been impossible at this speed, navigating terrain that would have challenged professional rally drivers. They reached the valley floor just as the convoy of SUVs disappeared into the forest. Dante followed a road that was barely more than a dirt track, overhung with branches and rutted from years of minimal maintenance. Isabella gripped the door handle as they bounced through potholes that could have swallowed smaller vehicles. Dante, slow down. If we hit a tree at this speed, we won't. His confidence was absolute, and despite her terror, Isabella found herself trusting him. There was something about the way he navigated the forest road, not like someone following a map, but like someone coming home. The road opened into a clearing where rustic buildings clustered around a central lodge that looked like something from a luxury wilderness retreat. Solar panels glinted on the roofs, and Isabella could see gardens, workshops, what might have been a school. It was beautiful, pastoral, the kind of intentional community that environmental magazines featured in articles about sustainable living. It was also under siege. The black SUVs were parked in aggressive formation around the main lodge, and men in tactical gear had taken positions behind their vehicles. They weren't quite pointing weapons at the buildings, but the threat was unmistakable. Stay in the car, Dante said, his voice carrying an authority Isabella had never heard before. Like hell. She was already opening her door when Dante's hand clamped around her wrist with surprising gentleness. Isabella, these people, they're not what they seem.
And neither am I.
What you're about to witness will change everything you think you know about the world. What are you talking about? Instead of answering, Dante released her wrist and climbed out of the Range Rover. The moment his feet hit the ground, the atmosphere in the clearing changed. The tactical team tensed, their weapons shifting toward him with practiced precision. But it was the reaction from the buildings that caught Isabella's attention. Doors opening, people emerging, all of them focused on Dante with an intensity that spoke of absolute loyalty. Or absolute fear. Dante Volkov, a voice called from the SUV formation. Federal agents. We have a warrant to search these premises. The man who stepped forward wore an expensive suit beneath his tactical vest, and Isabella recognized him immediately. Agent Marcus Webb, FBI Financial Crimes Division. She'd tangled with him before on cases involving corporate fraud, and he was known for his relentless pursuit of white-collar criminals. Agent Webb, Dante said, his Russian accent more pronounced than Isabella had ever heard it. You're trespassing on private property. Federal warrant supersedes property rights. We have credible evidence that this commune is engaged in money laundering and tax evasion. Isabella climbed out of the Range Rover despite Dante's warning, her legal instincts overriding her self-preservation. Agent Webb, I'm Isabella Sterling, attorney for Mr. Volkov. I'd like to see that warrant. Webb's eyes narrowed as he recognized her. Ms. Sterling, I should have known you'd be involved. Your client has some interesting business practices. My client's business practices are entirely legal. The warrant, Agent Webb. Webb signaled to one of his men, who approached with a folded document. Isabella accepted it and began reading, her trained eye catching inconsistencies immediately. This warrant is for financial records, she said loudly enough for everyone to hear. It doesn't authorize search of residential buildings or detention of individuals not specifically named. We'll determine the scope of our investigation, Webb replied. Actually, you'll follow federal law, which means you'll restrict your search to business offices and accounting records. Isabella stepped closer to Webb, using every inch of her height and every ounce of her courtroom presence. Unless you want this entire operation thrown out on procedural grounds. For a moment, tension crackled through the clearing like electricity. Webb's men shifted restlessly, clearly prepared for violence if their superior gave the word. But it was the people emerging from the buildings who held Isabella's attention, men and women of all ages, but all sharing certain characteristics: unusual height, predatory grace, and eyes that seemed to catch and reflect light like animals. Agent Webb, Dante said quietly, you have what you came for. The accounting records are in the main office. Take them and leave. I don't think so. Webb smiled, and it was the expression of a man who held all the cards. See, we've received some interesting information about your community here. Information that suggests your residents aren't quite as human as they appear on their tax returns. Isabella felt ice form in her stomach. Around the clearing, the atmosphere shifted subtly. Not panic, exactly, but a gathering tension that reminded her of the moment before a thunderstorm broke. I have no idea what you're implying, Dante said, but his voice carried a dangerous edge that made Webb's agents shift nervously. Don't you? Webb pulled out his phone, scrolling to a video file. Satellite footage from 3 nights ago. Taken during the full moon. Very interesting viewing. He turned the phone so everyone could see the screen, and Isabella's world tilted on its axis. The video showed the clearing from above, shot in infrared that turned the forest silver and black. But it was the figures moving through the frame that made Isabella's breath catch. Not human figures, but wolves. Dozens of them, far larger than any natural wolf, moving with purpose and intelligence through the buildings. Clever special effects, Dante said calmly. Hollywood has nothing on federal surveillance technology. Is that your official statement? Because I have more footage. Lots more. Webb's smile was predatory. And I have witnesses. People who've seen the transformations. People who'll testify that Dante Volkov isn't just a billionaire developer, he's the leader of the largest werewolf pack on the East Coast. The words hung in the air like a physical presence. Around the clearing, absolute silence fell. The kind of quiet that came before explosions, before violence, before the world changed forever. Isabella looked at Dante, searching his face for denial, for the reasonable explanation that would make Webb's accusation ridiculous. Instead, she saw resignation. Isabella, he said quietly, I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Find out what? But even as she asked, pieces were falling into place with terrible clarity. Dante's enhanced senses, his predatory grace, the way he'd driven mountain roads in near darkness like he could see every curve, the community's reaction to his presence, the absolute loyalty of his employees, the way he'd made her feel hunted and protected in equal measure. What are you? She whispered. Before Dante could answer, Webb's phone rang. He answered it with sharp efficiency, his expression shifting from triumph to confusion to alarm. What do you mean, stand down? Sir, we have them dead to rights. The evidence is, he paused, listening to whoever was on the other end. I understand, but... His face went pale. Yes, sir. Immediately. Webb ended the call and stared at his phone like it had bitten him. When he looked up, his expression was a mixture of fury and disbelief. Pack it up, he told his agents. We're leaving. Sir? One of the tactical officers looked confused. The search warrant is being rescinded. New orders from Washington. Webb's voice was tight, with barely controlled rage. Apparently, Mr. Volkov has friends in very high places. The FBI agents began retreating to their vehicles with military precision, but Webb lingered, his attention focused on Dante with burning intensity. This isn't over, he said quietly. Whatever pull you have, whatever favors you're calling in, it won't last forever. And when it runs out, I'll be waiting. Agent Webb, Dante's voice carried absolute authority, and despite herself, Isabella felt her pulse quicken in response. If you come to my territory again without proper cause, you won't be leaving. It was a threat delivered with calm certainty, and Webb clearly recognized it as such. He backed toward his SUV, never taking his eyes off Dante. Your territory won't be protected forever, Volkov. Monsters belong in cages, not boardrooms. The SUVs departed in a cloud of dust and diesel fumes, leaving the clearing in sudden silence. Isabella stood frozen, her mind struggling to process what she'd witnessed, what she'd learned, what it meant for everything she thought she knew about the world. Isabella, Dante said softly. She looked at him, really looked, and suddenly saw what she'd been missing. The predatory stillness, the enhanced awareness, the way other people instinctively deferred to him not because of his wealth, but because of something far more primal. You're a werewolf. Yes. And this place, these people. My pack. My family. My responsibility. Isabella sank onto the Range Rover's running board, her legs suddenly unable to support her weight. This is insane. This is impossible. Werewolves don't exist. We do. Dante approached cautiously, like she was a wild animal that might bolt. We have for thousands of years. We live among humans. We build businesses and families and communities. We're not monsters, Isabella. We're just different. Different. Isabella laughed, and the sound was edged with hysteria. You're mythological creatures. You change into wolves. You. She stopped, a new realization hitting her like a physical blow. The Cascade Project. You weren't trying to develop the land. You were trying to protect it. Yes. From people like me. From humans who would expose your existence. From people like Webb. Like Harrison. People who would use our existence as a weapon. Isabella looked around the clearing, seeing it with new eyes. Not a sustainable community or luxury retreat, but a sanctuary. A place where people who weren't entirely human could live. Without fear, could raise their children and practice their traditions away from a world that would destroy them if it knew the truth. Judge Harrison, she said suddenly. He knows, doesn't he? That's why he wanted the case to proceed. He was hoping I'd uncover your secret. We think so. Harrison has been investigating supernatural communities for years, gathering evidence, building files. He wants to expose us to gain political power, to position himself as the man who revealed the monsters hiding in plain sight. And I almost gave him what he wanted.
No.
Dante knelt in front of her, his pale green eyes intense with sincerity. You were fighting for justice, for environmental protection. You had no way of knowing the larger implications. Isabella stared at him, this man who'd upended her understanding of reality, who'd revealed himself as something that shouldn't exist but clearly did. 3 days ago, he'd been her enemy. Yesterday, he'd been her ally. Today, he was something else entirely. What happens now? She asked quietly. Now you have a choice to make. Which is? Dante's smile was soft, vulnerable, nothing like the predatory expressions she'd grown used to. Whether you can accept what I am, what we are. Whether you can help us protect this place and these people, knowing what you know. Isabella looked around the clearing again, at the faces watching her with mixtures of hope and fear, at the buildings that housed families and children and elderly pack members who'd lived here longer than she'd been alive. She thought about Judge Harrison's corruption, about Agent Webb's threats, about the video footage that could destroy everything these people had built. And she thought about justice. Not the legal kind she practiced in courtrooms, but the deeper kind that protected the innocent and preserved what mattered most. I need time to think, she said finally. How much time? Isabella stood, brushing dust from her clothes, her mind already working through the legal and ethical implications of what she'd learned. Give me until tonight. I need to understand what I'm really choosing. Dante nodded, stepping back to give her space. Victor will drive you back to Seattle. You'll be safe there while you decide. And if I choose to walk away, to pretend I never saw this place, never learned your secret, then you walk away. No pursuit, no threats, no consequences. You have my word. Isabella believed him. Despite everything, the impossibility of his nature, the danger surrounding them both, the fact that her entire worldview had been shattered in the space of 20 minutes, she believed him, which was either a sign of excellent judgment or complete insanity. "I'll have an answer by tonight," she promised. But as a tall, dark-haired man who could only be Victor approached with car keys, Isabella already knew what her answer would be. She'd built her career fighting for the underdog, protecting those who couldn't protect themselves. The fact that her new clients happened to transform into wolves under the full moon didn't change that fundamental truth. Judge Harrison and Agent Webb saw monsters to be caged or exposed. Isabella Sterling saw people who deserved justice. The only question now was whether she was brave enough to fight for them. Chapter 6: The Point of No Return. The Four Seasons Seattle felt different when Isabella returned. Not the elegant sanctuary she'd left that morning, but a stage set for the most important decision of her life. She stood at the windows of her suite, watching ferries cross Elliott Bay like white ghosts in the afternoon light, while her mind struggled to process everything she'd learned. Werewolves existed. Dante Volkov was their leader. Judge Harrison was hunting them, and she was caught in the middle of a war that could reshape the world. Isabella poured herself a glass of wine from the bottle Dante had brought the night before, Dom Perignon that tasted like liquid starlight and cost more than most people's rent. The champagne didn't make the impossible seem possible, but it did take the edge off her shock. Her phone buzzed with an incoming call. Marcus, her assistant back in New York. "Isabella? Thank God. I've been trying to reach you all day." "What's wrong?" "Everything." Marcus's voice was tight with stress. "Judge Harrison called this morning.
He wants to meet with you tomorrow."
He said it was urgent, related to the Cascade case. Isabella felt ice form in her stomach. Did he say why? No, but Isabella, he sounded different. Threatening. Like he was done playing games. She closed her eyes, remembering Webb's satellite footage, Harrison's veiled warnings at the charity gala, the black sedan that had been watching her building. The corrupt judge had been patient for 3 years, content to use her as a weapon when needed. But now that she was openly working with Dante, Harrison was running out of time and options. "Cancel all my meetings tomorrow," Isabella said. "And Marcus? If anyone asks where I am, you don't know." "Isabella, what's going on? You're scaring me." "You should be scared," Isabella thought.
We all should be.
"I'm handling a situation. I'll be back in New York in a few days." "A situation? What kind of?" Isabella ended the call before Marcus could finish the question. Some truths were too dangerous to share, even with people she trusted. She was still staring out at the bay when another call came in, this one from a number she didn't recognize. "Ms. Sterling." The voice was cultured, familiar, and made her blood run cold. "Judge Harrison. I understand you've been sightseeing in the Pacific Northwest. Beautiful country, full of hidden wonders." Isabella gripped the phone tighter. "What do you want?" "What I've always wanted. Justice.
Truth.
The exposure of criminals who think their wealth and connections put them above the law." "Dante Volkov isn't a criminal. Isn't he?" Harrison's laugh was soft, dangerous. "Tax evasion, money laundering, conspiracy to defraud the federal government. And those are just as human crimes." "Human crimes." The phrase hung in the air like a weapon. "I don't know what you're implying." "Don't you?" Harrison's voice dropped to a whisper. "I have video footage, Ms. Sterling. Satellite surveillance. Witness testimony. Enough evidence to bring down not just Dante Volkov, but his entire organization." Isabella moved away from the windows, suddenly feeling exposed despite being 50 floors above the street. "What do you want from me?" "The same thing I've always wanted. Your cooperation. Your professional expertise in building a case that will stand up in federal court. And if I refuse, then I'll have to question your judgment, your fitness to practice law, your loyalty to the country that made your career possible." Harrison paused, letting the threat sink in. It would be tragic if your association with known criminals led to disbarment proceedings. The words were carefully chosen, legally precise. Harrison wasn't just threatening her career, he was threatening her freedom. Conspiracy charges could put her in federal prison, and they both knew it. I need time to consider. Time is a luxury we don't have. Agent Webb's raid this morning was just the beginning. I have resources, Ms. Sterling. Resources that make the FBI look like mall security. If you want to protect your career, your reputation, your freedom, you'll meet with me tomorrow morning. Where? The Olympic Club, downtown Seattle. 9 a.m. Harrison's voice carried absolute confidence. Don't disappoint me, Miss Sterling. The consequences would be unfortunate. The line went dead, leaving Isabella alone with her terror and the sound of her own heartbeat. She sank onto the couch, her mind racing through possibilities, options, escape routes. Harrison held all the cards, evidence, federal resources, the power to destroy her career with a phone call. But he was also corrupt, compromised, vulnerable to exposure himself. If she could prove it. Isabella reached for her laptop, her fingers flying over the keyboard as she began searching for everything she could find about Judge Harrison's financial dealings, his real estate purchases, his connections to Meridian Development. She tried this 3 years ago and failed, but now she had resources she hadn't possessed before. She had Dante Volkov. An hour later, Isabella was deep in corporate filings when a soft knock interrupted her concentration. Room service, a voice called. But Isabella hadn't ordered anything, and after this morning's revelations, she wasn't taking chances. She approached the door cautiously, peering through the peephole. Viktor Petrov stood in the hallway, holding a silver tray and wearing the kind of patient expression that suggested he'd wait all night if necessary. Isabella opened the door, noting how Viktor's presence filled the space, not just his physical size, but something more primal, more dangerous. Like Dante, he moved with predatory grace, and his dark eyes held intelligence that seemed almost supernatural. Mr. Petrov. Viktor, please. May I come in? Isabella stepped aside, watching as Viktor entered her suite and set the tray on the coffee table. Under the silver cloche was a simple meal, soup, bread, fruit, but it was the envelope beside the plate that held her attention. From Dante? From the Alpha, Viktor said, and there was reverence in his voice when he used the title. He thought you might be hungry, and he wanted you to have this. Isabella opened the envelope with trembling fingers, expecting a letter or a legal document. Instead, she found photographs, dozens of them, showing the Cascade community at different times, in different seasons. Children playing in meadows, elderly pack members working in gardens, families gathering around communal fires. At the bottom of the stack was a handwritten note in Dante's precise script. Isabella, these are the people we're protecting. Not monsters. Not criminals. Just families who want to live in peace. Whatever you decide, know that you've given them hope simply by caring about justice.
D.
Isabella looked up to find Viktor watching her with dark eyes that seemed to see everything. How long have you known him? She asked. 23 years. Since we were children. And he's always been. Alpha. Viktor's smile was soft, genuine. Dante was born to lead. Even as a boy, he understood the weight of responsibility, the cost of protecting what matters. Isabella set down the photographs, but one image lingered in her mind. Dante kneeling beside a small girl with dark hair and his pale green eyes, both of them laughing at something beyond the camera's view. His daughter? His niece.
Anya.
She's 8. Viktor's expression grew serious. Her parents died in a hunting accident 2 years ago. Dante has been raising her since then. A hunting accident. Isabella didn't ask whether it had involved conventional hunters or the kind who tracked supernatural prey. Some questions were too dangerous to voice. She doesn't know what she is yet. The change doesn't come until puberty. For now, she's just a little girl who lost her parents and found safety with her uncle. Viktor moved to the windows, staring out at the bay. But if Harrison succeeds, if he exposes our existence, there will be no safe places left for children like Anya. The weight of responsibility settled on Isabella's shoulders like a physical presence. This wasn't just about environmental law or corporate corruption anymore. It was about protecting innocents who had no other champions. Judge Harrison called. Isabella said quietly. He wants to meet tomorrow morning. He's threatening federal charges if I don't cooperate. Victor went very still, and something dangerous flickered in his dark eyes. The Alpha won't let you face Harrison alone. He might not have a choice. If Dante shows up at the meeting, Harrison will see it as confirmation of everything he suspects. And if you go alone? Isabella touched the photographs again, thinking about 8-year-old Anya, about the families who'd built a life in the Cascade territories, about the man who'd revealed himself as something impossible and trusted her with his people's survival. Then I guess we find out if I'm as good a lawyer as I think I am. Victor studied her for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then he nodded, as if she'd passed some kind of test. The Alpha chose well, he said simply. Chose what? But Victor was already moving toward the door, pausing only to deliver one final message. Dante said to tell you that whatever you decide, you'll have his support. If you choose to walk away, he'll ensure your safety. If you choose to fight. Victor's smile was sharp, predatory. You'll have the full resources of the pack behind you. Alone again, Isabella stared at the photographs scattered across her coffee table. Children who deserved to grow up in safety. Families who'd found peace in the wilderness. Elderly pack members whose wisdom and stories would be lost if their community was destroyed. And at the center of it all, a billionaire alpha who'd trusted her with the most dangerous secret in the world. Isabella reached for her phone and dialed the number Dante had given her. He answered on the first ring. Isabella. I've made my decision. Silence stretched between them, heavy with possibility and fear. And I'm going to meet with Harrison tomorrow. I'm going to listen to his offer. And then I'm going to destroy him. Dante's exhale was audible over the connection. Are you certain? Once you take the step, there's no going back. Harrison will see you as an enemy, and he has resources. So do I, Isabella interrupted. I have the truth. I have evidence of his corruption. And I have something he doesn't. Which is? Isabella looked at the photographs again, at the faces of people who'd welcomed a stranger into their most guarded secret, who'd trusted her with their survival. I have something worth fighting for. Isabella. Dante's voice was soft, vulnerable, nothing like the commanding alpha she'd witnessed that morning. You don't understand what you're risking. Harrison won't just threaten your career. He'll come after everything, your reputation, your freedom, your life. Then I guess you'll have to protect me. With my life, Dante said, and the fierce certainty in his voice made her pulse quicken. With everything I have. Good. Isabella stood and moved to the windows, watching lights come alive across the Seattle skyline. Because I'm about to start a war, and I'm going to need an alpha by my side. The Olympic Club occupied a full city block in downtown Seattle, its classical facade hiding meeting rooms where deals worth billions were negotiated and political careers were made or broken. Isabella arrived at 8:50, 10 minutes early but not eager. Arriving too early suggested desperation, while being late implied disrespect she couldn't afford. She dressed carefully for this meeting. Charcoal gray suit by Armani, understated jewelry, her hair pulled back in a style that suggested competence without softness. Every detail calculated to project strength, intelligence, and the kind of professional confidence that made opponents reconsider their assumptions. Judge Harrison was waiting in a private dining room overlooking the Sound, already seated at a table set for two. He rose when she entered, extending his hand with practiced charm. Ms. Sterling, thank you for coming. Judge Harrison. Isabella accepted his handshake briefly, noting the slight dampness of his palm. Good. He was nervous. You said this was urgent. Please sit. Coffee? The Olympic Club serves an exceptional blend. Isabella remained standing. I prefer to conduct business standing. What do you want? Harrison's smile faltered slightly, but he gestured toward the chair across from him. Surely we can be civilized about this. Civilized? Isabella moved to the windows, putting the table between them. Is surveillance of my apartment civilized? Are threats against my career civilized? I prefer to think of it as protective oversight. You've become involved with dangerous people, Ms. Sterling. People who prey on idealistic lawyers and naive environmental activists. People like Dante Volkov, among others. Harrison opened a leather portfolio, withdrawing a thick folder. What do you know about your client's financial dealings? His real estate acquisitions? His unusual employee demographics? Isabella accepted the folder, flipping through documents she recognized: corporate filings, property records, tax returns. On the surface, everything looked legitimate. But she'd learned to read between the lines, to spot the patterns that suggested hidden agendas. I see standard business practices. Real estate investment, environmental conservation, sustainable development. Look closer. Harrison leaned forward, his eyes bright with zealous certainty. The properties he's acquired, all of them border national forests, wildlife preserves, protected wilderness areas. The timing of his purchases corresponds exactly with increased reports of unusual animal activity in those regions. Isabella kept her expression neutral, but her pulse quickened. Harrison's research was more thorough than she'd expected, his conclusions more accurate than she'd hoped. Correlation isn't causation, Judge Harrison. Wealthy developers often invest in property near protected lands. The proximity maintains property values while limiting development competition. And the employee records? The remarkable number of workers who list no permanent addresses, no previous employment history, no verifiable references. Migrant workers. Seasonal employees. People looking for fresh starts in rural communities. Isabella closed the folder and set it on the table. None of this suggests criminal activity. Doesn't it? Harrison stood, moving to stand beside her at the windows. What if I told you that several of these employees have been identified at the scenes of livestock attacks in 3 different states? What if I told you that satellite surveillance has captured footage of large predators moving through Volkov's properties? Predators. Isabella forced herself to remain calm, even as her mind raced through possibilities. How much did Harrison actually know? How much could he prove? I'd say you've been spending too much time reading conspiracy theories online. Harrison laughed, but there was no humor in the sound. Miss Sterling, I've spent 3 years building this case. I have video evidence, witness testimony, financial records that trace back to illegal wildlife trafficking operations. When I'm finished, Dante Volkov will be exposed as the leader of the most dangerous criminal organization in North America. And what does this have to do with me? Everything. Harrison moved closer, close enough that Isabella could smell his cologne and the faint scent of desperation. I need a prosecutor with environmental law expertise. Someone who understands the technical aspects of the case. Someone whose reputation for integrity is beyond question. You want me to prosecute Dante? I want you to help me save this country from monsters masquerading as businessmen. Isabella stared at him, seeing past the expensive suit and judicial authority to the fanatic beneath. Harrison didn't just want to expose Dante. He wanted to destroy him, to use public fear of the supernatural to advance his own political ambitions. What's really in this for you, Judge Harrison? Justice? Or the kind of career advancement that comes from being the man who revealed the monsters hiding in plain sight? Something flickered in Harrison's eyes, anger, maybe, or recognition that she saw through his noble rhetoric. Does it matter? The end result is the same. Dangerous criminals brought to justice. Criminals? Isabella moved away from the windows, putting distance between them. Or people trying to live peacefully in a world that would destroy them if it knew they existed? People. Harrison's voice rose, then dropped to a dangerous whisper. Miss Sterling, we're talking about predators. Killers. Creatures that hunt human beings for sport. How can you defend them? The same way I defend any client. By ensuring they receive due process under law. By protecting their rights. By presuming innocence until guilt is proven. Their rights? Harrison laughed, and the sound was edged with madness. They're animals, Miss Sterling. Dangerous animals that belong in cages or laboratories, not boardrooms and country estates. Isabella felt something cold and certain settle in her chest. This wasn't about justice or law or protecting society. This was about fear, hatred, and the kind of bigotry that had driven witch hunts and genocide throughout human history. I won't help you, she said quietly. Then you'll be destroyed along with them. Harrison's mask of judicial dignity finally slipped, revealing the fanatic beneath. I have evidence of your involvement with Volkov's organization. Financial records showing payments to your firm. Photographs of you at his properties. Video footage of you meeting with his associates. All of which proves I'm doing my job as his legal counsel. Or proves you're part of his criminal conspiracy. Harrison opened another folder, this one filled with photographs. Isabella entering Dante's building, dining with him at the charity gala, standing with him in the Cascade clearing. A federal grand jury might find these very interesting, especially when combined with testimony about your relationship with the defendant. Isabella stared at the photographs, her mind cataloging the implications. Harrison was right. In the right context, with the right prosecutor, these images could be used to suggest complicity in whatever crimes they decided to charge Dante with. You're blackmailing me. I'm offering you a choice. Help me bring down Dante Volkov and his organization, or face federal conspiracy charges yourself. And if I refuse? Harrison's smile was coldly satisfied. Then you'll discover exactly how unforgiving the federal justice system can be to lawyers who choose the wrong side. Isabella looked at the photographs again, at the evidence Harrison had assembled, at the trap he'd spent 3 years constructing. He held most of the cards, commanded federal resources, and had the kind of political connections that could make her life disappear. But he'd made one crucial mistake. He'd assumed she was motivated by fear instead of justice. Judge Harrison, Isabella said, her voice carrying the kind of authority she'd perfected in courtrooms, I have a counter-proposal. Oh. Drop your investigation. Destroy your files. Leave Dante Volkov and his people alone. Isabella moved to stand directly in front of him, close enough to see the surprise in his eyes. Do that, and I won't expose your connection to Meridian Development. Harrison went very still. I don't know what you're talking about, don't you? Isabella smiled, and it was sharp enough to cut. Jackson Hole, Wyoming. $23 million. Cash purchase, no mortgage. Rather expensive for a federal judge's salary, wouldn't you say? That property was inherited. From whom? I've checked the records, Judge Harrison. No inheritance. No gift tax filings. No legitimate source for that kind of money. Isabella opened her own folder, withdrawing documents she'd spent 3 years collecting. But I did find some interesting connections between the purchase date and your ruling on the Meridian Development case. Harrison's face had gone pale. That's circumstantial evidence at best. Is it? Because I also have bank records, shell company documents, a paper trail that leads directly from Meridian's accounts to yours. Isabella set the documents on the table between them. How long do you think it would take federal investigators to connect those dots? You're bluffing. Am I? Isabella pulled out her phone, showing him a contact labeled Washington Post, Investigative Desk. One phone call, Judge Harrison. One conversation with a reporter who specializes in judicial corruption. How do you think that story would play in the national media? For a long moment, silence stretched between them. Harrison stared at the documents, his mind clearly racing through possibilities, calculating odds, weighing the cost of exposure against the value of his crusade. You don't understand what you're protecting, he said finally. These creatures, they're not human. They're predators. If the public knew they existed, the public would panic. People would die. Innocent families would be slaughtered by mobs who can't tell the difference between monsters and people trying to live quiet lives. Isabella gathered her documents, her decision made. I won't be part of that. Then you've chosen your side. Yes, Isabella said, moving toward the door. I choose justice over fear. I choose protecting the innocent over advancing political careers. And I choose standing with people who trust me to do what's right. She was almost to the door when Harrison's voice stopped her. This isn't over, Ms. Sterling. I have resources you can't imagine. Allies in places you've never heard of. If you think one corrupt land deal is enough to stop me. Isabella looked back over her shoulder, and her smile was pure predator. Judge Harrison? I'm just getting started. Chapter 7. The Alpha's Claim. Isabella's hands were shaking as she speed-dialed Dante's number in the Olympic Club's marble lobby. Around her, Seattle's political and business elite moved with practiced discretion, their conversations muted, their expressions carefully neutral. She felt like she was standing in the eye of a hurricane, surrounded by false calm while chaos gathered strength. Isabella. Dante's voice was tense, with controlled worry. How did it go? I just declared war on a federal judge. She pushed through the club's brass doors into the Seattle morning, needing air, needing space, needing to move. Harrison isn't just corrupt, he's obsessed. He sees your people as monsters, and he won't stop until he's exposed them all. Where are you? Downtown. Walking toward Pike Place Market, Isabella wove through foot traffic, her heels clicking against wet pavement. Dante, we're in serious trouble. He has surveillance footage, witness testimony, financial records. And he's got federal resources backing him. I'm coming to get you.
No.
Isabella ducked into an alley beside a coffee shop, seeking privacy. If Harrison's people are watching, they'll see us together. That'll just confirm everything he suspects. Then where? Isabella closed her eyes, thinking fast. She needed somewhere public enough to be safe, private enough to talk, neutral enough that Harrison's surveillance wouldn't seem suspicious. The Starbucks Reserve Roastery. Capitol Hill. 1 hour. Isabella. Dante. She leaned against the brick wall, drawing strength from its solid presence. I need you to know something. I could have taken Harrison's deal. Could have walked away clean. But I didn't.
Why?
The question was simple, but the answer was anything but. Isabella thought about Anya's photograph, about Victor's quiet loyalty, about a community of people who trusted her with their most dangerous secret. Because some things are worth fighting for. The Starbucks Reserve Roastery occupied a converted warehouse on Capitol Hill, its industrial chic design hiding nothing, exposed brick, copper pipes, the massive roasting machinery that turned green beans into liquid gold. Isabella chose a corner table with clear sightlines to all entrances, her back to the wall, her escape routes mapped. Old habits from her childhood died hard. Dante arrived exactly 1 hour later, moving through the crowded cafe with predatory grace. He'd changed from his mountain casual into a charcoal suit that made him look like he'd stepped off a magazine cover, but Isabella could see the tension in his shoulders, the way his pale green eyes cataloged every face, every possible threat. He slid into the seat across from her, close enough that she could catch his scent, expensive cologne over something wilder, more primal. Tell me everything, he said without preamble. Isabella related the conversation with Harrison, watching Dante's expression grow progressively darker. When she finished, he was silent for a long moment, his hands wrapped around his coffee cup with enough force to make his knuckles white. He called us animals, Dante said finally. Yes. Predators who belong in cages. Yes. Something dangerous flickered in Dante's pale green eyes. And you defended us. I defended justice. Isabella leaned forward, her voice dropping to a whisper. But Dante, Harrison isn't going to stop. He sees you as his ticket to political power, your people as proof that he was right to fear what he doesn't understand. This is going to get worse before it gets better. How much worse? Federal indictments, congressional hearings, media exposure that'll make your life impossible. Isabella pulled out her phone, showing him the photographs Harrison had taken. He's been building this case for 3 years. He has evidence, resources, and the kind of fanatical certainty that makes people dangerous. Dante studied the photos, him entering his office building, dining at the charity gala, standing in the Cascade clearing. In the right context, with the right prosecutor, they could be devastating. There's something else, Isabella said quietly. Someone's been investigating your land holdings, asking questions about your connection to the territories. Harrison claims it's his people, but the timeline doesn't match. Someone else is involved. I know. Dante set down his phone, his expression grim. Victor's been tracking the investigation. It's sophisticated, well-funded, professional. Not government, private.
Who? We're still working on that.
But whoever it is, they know exactly what to look for. Dante leaned back in his chair, and Isabella caught a glimpse of the alpha beneath the businessman. Dangerous, protective, absolutely ruthless when threatened. The question is whether they're working with Harrison or against him. Does it matter? It matters because if there are multiple threats, we need to prioritize our responses. Dante pulled out his own phone, scrolling through messages. I've called in favors, activated resources. By tonight, we'll know who's been asking questions and why. Isabella watched him work, the casual way he commanded resources that most people could only dream of, the absolute confidence that problems could be solved with enough money and influence. 3 days ago, she'd seen only arrogance in that confidence. Now she recognized it as the burden of leadership, the weight of protecting people who depended on him for their survival. What can I do to help? Dante looked up from his phone, and something in his expression made her pulse quicken. You've done enough. More than enough. It's time for you to step back. Let us handle this. Like hell. Isabella, this isn't a legal matter anymore. Harrison has moved beyond corruption into open warfare. When we respond, it won't be with briefs and depositions. The implication hung in the air between them. Isabella had grown up rough, had seen violence up close, but she'd built her adult life around the belief that justice could be achieved through law, through proper channels, through civilized discourse. But Harrison had abandoned civilized discourse the moment he'd started surveillance and threats. What are you planning? Nothing that will compromise your legal standing or professional ethics. Dante reached across the table, his fingers brushing hers with surprising gentleness. But I need you safe while we handle this. Harrison has already threatened you once. When he realizes you've chosen sides, he'll escalate. I can take care of myself. Can you? Dante's grip tightened slightly, and Isabella felt electricity shoot up her arm. Can you handle federal agents conducting surveillance? Professional kidnappers? Assassins who specialize in making deaths look accidental. The words were spoken calmly, matter-of-factly, but they hit Isabella like physical blows. She'd been thinking in terms of legal warfare, motions and hearings and appeals. But Dante lived in a world where conflict meant life and death, where protecting his people required resources and methods that existed outside the law. You're scaring me, she whispered. Good. You should be scared. Dante stood, dropping money on the table for their untouched drinks. Come on. We're getting you somewhere safe. Where? The one place Harrison can't touch you. The territories. Isabella followed him out of the cafe, her mind racing. Going to the Cascade territories would mean crossing a line she couldn't uncross, committing herself to a world that existed in the shadows of the one she knew. It would also mean placing herself completely under Dante's protection, trusting a man whose nature she was still learning to accept. But as they walked toward his car, a different vehicle than this morning, she noted, probably changed for security reasons, Isabella realized she'd already made her choice. She'd made it the moment she'd told Harrison to go to hell, the moment she'd chosen justice over safety. Dante, she said as he opened the passenger door for her. Yes. When this is over, when Harrison is neutralized and your people are safe, what happens to us? The question surprised them both. Isabella hadn't meant to ask it, wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. But something about the way Dante looked at her, protective, possessive, hungry, made her pulse quicken in ways that had nothing to do with fear. That depends, he said quietly. On what? On whether you can accept what I am, what we are, what being part of this world really means. Isabella looked into his pale green eyes, seeing not the billionaire businessman or the commanding alpha, but the man who'd trusted her with his most dangerous secret, who'd revealed himself as something impossible because she needed to understand what she was protecting. Ask me again when this is over, she said. Dante's smile was soft, genuine, nothing like the predatory expressions she'd grown used to. I will. The drive back to the mountains passed in companionable silence, broken only by Dante's occasional phone calls in rapid Russian. Isabella watched the landscape change from urban sophistication to rural wilderness, feeling like she was traveling not just through space but through worlds, leaving behind the civilized realm of law and order for something older, wilder, more dangerous. They were 30 minutes from the territories when Dante's phone rang with a tone Isabella hadn't heard before. Urgent, demanding, the kind of sound that made her pulse quicken. "Victor," Dante answered without looking at the display. The voice that crackled through the speaker was tight with controlled panic. "Alpha, we have a problem. Multiple problems. Talk." FBI raid on the New York offices. They hit Volkov Industries an hour ago, seized all financial records, arrested 6 employees on suspicion of money laundering. Isabella felt ice form in her stomach. Harrison moved fast. "There's more," Victor continued. "Someone leaked the satellite footage to CNN. It's all over the news. Speculation about unusual predators, mysterious communities, billionaire developers with impossible secrets." Dante's hands tightened on the steering wheel. "How bad?" "Bad. The footage is grainy enough that mainstream media is treating it like a curiosity, but supernatural communities are taking it seriously. We've had calls from alphas in 12 states asking if exposure protocols should be activated." Exposure protocols. Isabella didn't ask what that meant, but the grim set of Dante's jaw suggested it involved more than press releases and damage control. "Anything else?" Judge Harrison held a press conference 30 minutes ago. He's calling for a federal task force to investigate unusual predator activity in protected wilderness areas. He's positioning himself as the man brave enough to confront threats that other officials have ignored. Dante was quiet for a moment, his enhanced senses no doubt processing information Isabella couldn't detect. When he spoke, his voice carried absolute authority. Full security protocols for all packed territories. No one travels alone. No one shifts where they might be observed. "And Victor?" "Yes, Alpha? Find out who leaked that footage. When you do..." Dante paused, and something dangerous flickered in his pale green eyes. "Handle it." The call ended, leaving them alone with the sound of tires on asphalt and the weight of impending crisis. "It's starting," Isabella said quietly. "Yes." The exposure. The panic. The persecution of innocent people who just want to live in peace. "Yes." Isabella stared out at the forest rushing past, thinking about families like the ones she'd seen in Dante's photographs. "We have to stop him. We will." Dante's voice carried absolute certainty, the kind of confidence that came from being born to protect others. "Harrison has no idea what he's unleashed." "What do you mean?" "He thinks he's hunting animals. Predators who can be caged or killed." Dante's smile was sharp, predatory, nothing like the gentle expressions Isabella had grown used to. "He's about to learn that we're not prey." "Dante." "Isabella." He looked at her then, and she saw not the businessman or even the alpha, but something older and infinitely more dangerous. "I need you to understand something. What happens next, it won't be civilized. It won't follow rules or proper procedures. It will be war." "What are you saying?" "I'm saying that if you want to walk away, this is your last chance. Once we reach the territories, once you're officially under pack protection, there's no neutral ground left." Isabella thought about her apartment in New York, her law practice, the carefully constructed life she'd built around the belief that justice could be achieved through proper channels. Then she thought about 8-year-old Anya, about families who trusted her with their survival, about a corrupt judge who saw people as monsters simply because they were different. "I'm not walking away. Even if it costs you everything, your career, your reputation, your safety, even then." Isabella reached across the console, covering his hand with hers. "Some things are worth fighting for. Some people are worth protecting. And some battles have to be fought, regardless of the cost." Dante's smile was devastating. Part gratitude, part admiration, part something deeper and more dangerous. "Then welcome to the war, Solnishko." The Range Rover crested a hill, and the Cascade territories spread below them like a hidden kingdom, ancient forests, crystal streams, and somewhere among the trees, a community that had just become the most hunted people in America. Isabella squeezed Dante's hand, drawing strength from his presence, from his absolute certainty that they would find a way to protect what mattered most. She'd chosen her side in a war that would reshape the world. Now she had to help win it. Chapter 8. under siege. The Cascade territories had transformed from peaceful sanctuary to armed fortress in the 6 hours since Isabella and Dante had left for Seattle. Guard posts now flanked the hidden road leading to the community, manned by pack members whose human forms couldn't disguise their predatory alertness. Security cameras glinted from tree branches, and Isabella caught glimpses of movement in the forest, sentries positioned where intruders would never see them coming. "Welcome to Fortress Volkov," Dante said grimly as they passed the 3rd checkpoint. "This is what exposure looks like." The main lodge buzzed with activity that reminded Isabella of a military command center. Laptops glowed on every surface, phones rang constantly, and pack members moved with purpose that spoke of crisis management protocols refined over generations. At the center of it all sat Victor, coordinating responses with the efficiency of a general directing a campaign. "Alpha," he said without looking up from his screens. "Status report." Later, Dante's attention was focused on a young woman approaching from across the room. Early 20s, dark hair, pale green eyes that marked her unmistakably as Pac. "Sarah, what's the media situation?" "Contained, barely." Sarah's voice carried the stress of someone who'd been managing impossible tasks for hours. "The satellite footage is trending on social media, but mainstream outlets are treating it as a curiosity. We've planted debunking stories, pushed alternative explanations, flooded comment sections with skepticism. How long can that last? Maybe 48 hours. After that." Sarah shrugged eloquently. "People will start asking harder questions. Demanding official investigations. Looking for proof." Isabella watched the controlled chaos around her, impressed despite herself by the pack's coordination. These weren't the savage animals Harrison imagined. They were a sophisticated community with resources, connections, and contingency plans most governments would envy. "What about federal response?" Dante asked. "Mixed." Victor finally looked up from his computers. "The FBI raid on your New York offices was theatrical, lots of cameras, minimal actual investigation. But there's chatter about joint task forces, increased surveillance of wilderness areas, expanded authority for wildlife management agencies. Harrison's building his coalition. It gets worse." Victor turned his laptop around, showing a news feed from CNN. Judge Harrison stood behind a podium bristling with microphones, his expression grave with manufactured concern. "Cannot ignore credible evidence of unusual predator activity in our protected wilderness areas. The footage obtained through legitimate federal surveillance shows creatures that simply should not exist in these ecosystems. We have a responsibility to investigate, to protect both our natural resources and the communities that border these territories." The reporter's follow-up questions were predictable. "Judge Harrison, are you suggesting these are escaped exotic animals? Illegal breeding operations?" "I'm suggesting we don't know what we're dealing with. And until we do, the American people deserve answers. Transparent answers. Not the kind of corporate stonewalling we've seen from developers like Dante Volkov." Isabella felt sick watching Harrison's performance. Every word was carefully chosen, designed to build public support while maintaining plausible deniability. He wasn't claiming werewolves existed. He was simply asking reasonable questions about unusual wildlife. Questions that would lead federal investigators straight to the pack's doorstep. "How long before they find us?" Isabella asked. "They already know where we are," Dante said quietly. "The question is how long before they work up the courage to come here." "What do you mean?" Victor answered. "Federal law enforcement agencies have known about supernatural communities for decades. There are protocols, agreements, tacit understandings about territorial boundaries. But those agreements depend on secrecy. And now secrecy is compromised. Now," Sarah said, "politicians like Harrison can demand investigations without seeming crazy. They can use public pressure to force federal agencies into actions they've been avoiding for 50 years. Isabella sank into a chair, the magnitude of the crisis finally hitting her. This wasn't just about protecting one pack or stopping one corrupt judge. This was about preventing a supernatural Cold War from becoming hot, about protecting thousands of people whose only crime was being different. "There's something else," Victor said carefully. We identified the source of the investigation into your business dealings. Dante went very still. And Meridian Development Corporation. The name hung in the air like a curse. Isabella remembered Harrison's connection to Meridian from 3 years ago. The wetlands case, the corrupt ruling, the vacation home purchased with suspicious money. Harrison's using them as his private investigation arm, she realized. More than that. Victor pulled up another screen, this one showing corporate filings and financial records. Meridian isn't just investigating, they're buying land. Lots of it. Properties adjacent to known PAC territories across the Pacific Northwest. Dante moved to study the screen, his expression growing progressively darker. They're building a cordon, trying to trap us. Or force us into the open, Sarah added. If they control the escape routes, limit our territory, eventually we'll have no choice but to shift where satellites can record it. Isabella felt pieces clicking into place with terrible clarity. It's not just about exposure. It's about extermination. 3 pairs of pale green eyes turned to focus on her. Think about it, Isabella continued, her legal mind working through the implications. Harrison doesn't just want to expose werewolves. He wants to position himself as their primary opponent. But he can't do that if you disappear into the wilderness or relocate to other countries. So he traps us, Dante said slowly. He traps you. Forces you to defend fixed territories where federal resources can find you. Then he uses public safety as justification for whatever response he deems necessary. Victor's expression was grim. Internment camps. Or worse. Isabella looked around the room at faces that had become familiar, at people who'd welcomed her despite the danger she represented. Harrison sees you as animals. Once public opinion turns, once people are scared enough. She didn't need to finish. History offered too many examples of what happened when fear overcame humanity, when entire populations were deemed threats to public safety. Then we don't let public opinion turn, Dante said with absolute authority. We control the narrative instead of reacting to it.
How?
Dante's smile was sharp, predatory, nothing like the gentle expressions Isabella had grown used to. By giving the media a story they'll actually want to report. Before anyone could ask what he meant, the lodge's security system chimed with an incoming alert. Sarah rushed to the monitors, her face pale as she processed what she was seeing. We have vehicles approaching. Multiple vehicles. Federal plates. FBI. Victor asked.
Worse.
U.S. Marshals. And they're not alone. Sarah enhanced the image, showing a convoy of black SUVs followed by news vans from major networks. Harrison's brought the media with him. Isabella felt ice form in her stomach. He's forcing a confrontation. On camera. Alpha, Victor said quietly. We can disappear into the forest. Make this a very expensive wild goose chase.
No.
Dante was already moving toward the lodge's main entrance, his presence filling the space with dangerous authority. Running makes us look guilty. Hiding makes us look dangerous. What's the alternative? Dante paused at the door, looking back at his people, his pack, his family, his responsibility. We give them exactly what they came for. The convoy arranged itself in the main clearing with theatrical precision, U.S. Marshals taking defensive positions while media crews set up cameras and satellite feeds. Isabella counted at least 6 news organizations, including CNN, Fox News, and what looked like international correspondents. Harrison had orchestrated this perfectly. Whatever happened next would be broadcast live to millions of viewers, creating the kind of public pressure that made political careers and destroyed lives. Dante emerged from the lodge with calm dignity, flanked by Victor and 2 other pack members Isabella recognized from her previous visit. He changed into a simple black suit that made him look less like a billionaire and more like what he truly was, an alpha protecting his territory. The lead marshal, a woman in her 50s with gray hair and no-nonsense bearing, approached with warrant in hand. Dante Volkov, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, money laundering, and violation of federal wildlife protection statutes. Marshal Rodriguez. Dante accepted the handcuffs with calm dignity, as if being arrested was a minor inconvenience rather than the culmination of a federal investigation. I assume you have warrants for the property search as well? We do. Rodriguez gestured to her team, who began spreading out across the clearing with practiced efficiency. This facility and all associated structures are subject to federal seizure pending investigation. And the residents will be relocated to appropriate facilities pending determination of their legal status. Appropriate facilities. The euphemism hung in the air like a threat. Isabella watched pack members emerging from buildings, their faces carefully neutral, but their body language screaming of barely controlled violence. These were people who'd never been caged, never been subject to federal authority, never been treated as anything less than free citizens. They were about to discover what exposure meant for people society deemed dangerous. Marshal Rodriguez. Isabella stepped forward, her voice carrying courtroom authority. Isabella Sterling, attorney for Mr. Volkov. I'd like to review those warrants. Rodriguez handed over the documents with professional courtesy, but her attention remained focused on Dante. Smart woman, she recognized the real threat in the clearing, even if she didn't understand its nature. Isabella scanned the warrants, her legal mind cataloging irregularities, questionable probable cause, constitutional violations that would make the entire proceeding vulnerable to appeal. But appeals took months, and Harrison was playing for immediate results. These warrants are overly broad, she announced loudly enough for the cameras to hear. They violate Fourth Amendment. That's for the courts to decide, Rodriguez replied. Indeed it is. Isabella moved closer to the news cameras, playing to an audience of millions. And I'm sure the American people will be fascinated to learn how federal resources are being used to persecute law-abiding citizens whose only crime is choosing to live privately on their own property. It was good theater, but Isabella knew it wouldn't be enough. Harrison had spent years building toward this moment, gathering evidence, positioning assets, creating a narrative that would survive legal challenges. What he hadn't counted on was Dante's willingness to gamble everything on a single desperate play. Before you proceed, Marshal, Dante said with calm authority, there's something you should know about this community. Something that will help you understand why federal jurisdiction might be complicated. Rodriguez paused, clearly recognizing that whatever Dante was about to say would change everything. The residents of this territory aren't just American citizens, Dante continued, his voice carrying across the clearing to the watching cameras. They're also members of a sovereign tribal nation that has existed on this land for over 200 years. Isabella stared at him, her legal mind racing through the implications. Tribal sovereignty was one of the few areas where federal authority faced legitimate constitutional limits, where historical treaties created complex jurisdictional questions that courts handled carefully. What tribal nation? Rodriguez asked skeptically. Dante's smile was sharp, dangerous. The Cascade Nation, formally recognized by the federal government in 1847, never dissolved, never relocated, never surrendered territorial claims to this specific region. He pulled out his phone. Scrolling to documents, Isabella realized he must have prepared for exactly this moment. Federal recognition papers, historical treaties, congressional records acknowledging Cascade's sovereignty over these 15,000 acres. Dante handed the phone to Rodriguez, whose expression grew progressively more concerned as she read. I believe you'll find that federal jurisdiction here is limited. Rodriguez studied the documents while her team exchanged uncertain glances. Tribal sovereignty was a legal minefield that most federal agents preferred to avoid, requiring specialized protocols and interagency coordination that could take months to arrange. Even if these documents are legitimate, she said finally, federal criminal activity supersedes tribal jurisdiction. Does it? Isabella stepped forward, her legal expertise finally finding solid ground. Actually, Marshal Rodriguez, tribal sovereignty creates concurrent jurisdiction at best. Any federal action on recognized tribal land requires consultation with tribal authorities, consideration of existing treaties, and adherence to protocols established by the Indian Gaming Regulatory Act. This isn't a gaming issue, isn't it? Because the Cascade Nation operates several businesses that could be considered gaming enterprises under federal definition. which means this entire operation could be violating not just tribal sovereignty, but also interstate commerce regulations. Isabella was bluffing. She had no idea what businesses the pack operated or whether they qualified as gaming enterprises. But she understood federal bureaucracy, understood how jurisdictional uncertainty could paralyze investigations, force delays, create opportunities for legal challenges. More importantly, she understood media narratives. So, let me get this straight, Isabella announced to the cameras. Federal agents are conducting armed raids against a sovereign tribal nation, forcing relocation of indigenous people from their ancestral lands, based on warrants that may violate constitutional protections and international treaties governing tribal rights. She paused, letting the words sink in. Does this remind anyone else of previous federal actions against Native American communities? Actions that history has judged poorly? The media crews were already adjusting their coverage, sensing a story that was bigger and more complex than simple corporate fraud. Reporters began speaking into cameras with a kind of urgency that suggested breaking news updates, that suggested a narrative shift Harrison hadn't anticipated. Rodriguez looked like a woman who'd stumbled into a political minefield. She spoke quietly into her radio, clearly consulting with superiors who were probably watching this unfold on live television. "Marshal," Dante said gently, "perhaps this would be better handled through proper diplomatic channels. Tribal nation to federal government, with appropriate consultation and respect for sovereignty." It was beautifully played. Dante had transformed himself from a suspected criminal into an indigenous leader protecting his people's rights. The pack had become not a community of dangerous predators, but a sovereign tribal nation facing federal overreach. And Harrison, watching from wherever he'd positioned himself to observe his triumph, had just seen his carefully constructed narrative collapse in real time. Rodriguez made her decision. "Stand down," she ordered her team. "We're withdrawing pending consultation with the Bureau of Indian Affairs." As the federal agents began retreating to their vehicles, Isabella allowed herself a moment of satisfaction. They'd bought time, created legal complications, shifted public perception away from Harrison's preferred narrative. But she also knew this was only the opening move in a much longer game. Harrison wouldn't be deterred by temporary setbacks or jurisdictional complications. He'd regroup, adapt his strategy, find new ways to pressure the pack into exposure. The war was just beginning. But for the first time since this all started, Isabella believed they might actually win it. Chapter 9. The Hunt Intensifies. The secure conference room beneath Volkov Tower looked more like a war room than a corporate boardroom. Multiple screens displaying surveillance feeds, encrypted communication channels, and maps marking supernatural communities across North America. Isabella sat at the polished table, watching Dante coordinate responses with pack leaders from 12 different states, while Victor managed federal intelligence gathering with the efficiency of someone who'd done this before. They'd returned to New York 36 hours after the federal standoff, leaving the Cascade territories under heavy, but respectful surveillance. The tribal sovereignty gambit had worked, for now, but Isabella knew it was a temporary solution to a permanent problem. Judge Harrison wasn't going to be deterred by legal technicalities. "Status report," Dante said as the last video conference ended. His voice carried the exhaustion of Gersumione, who'd been coordinating crisis management across multiple time zones, but his pale-eyed eyes remained sharp, predatory. "Media narrative is holding," Sarah reported from her bank of computers. "Mainstream outlets are treating this as a story about federal overreach against indigenous rights. Harrison's press conferences are being framed as political grandstanding rather than legitimate law enforcement." "For now," Victor added grimly. "But he's not giving up. Our sources inside federal agencies report increased surveillance of all known pack territories. Satellite coverage, electronic monitoring, financial investigations. He's mapping us," Isabella realized, "building a comprehensive picture of supernatural communities nationwide." Worse than that, Dante moved to stand behind her chair, close enough that she could feel the heat radiating from his body. "He's building a target list." The implications settled over the room like a shroud. Isabella had spent days thinking in terms of legal protection for Dante's pack, but the scope of Harrison's ambition was far larger. He wasn't just hunting one community. He was preparing for a coordinated strike against werewolves across the entire continent. How many packs are there? Isabella asked quietly. In North America? 47 confirmed territories. Maybe 3,000 individuals total. Victor pulled up a map showing dots scattered from Alaska to Mexico. Most are smaller than the Cascade Pack, 30 or 40 members living quietly in rural areas. A few are larger, more integrated into human society. Isabella studied the map, thinking about families and communities who had no idea they were being hunted, who trusted in secrecy that was rapidly becoming useless. We have to warn them. We are, Dante said. Every alpha on the continent has been briefed. Security protocols are being implemented, escape routes prepared, contingency plans activated. And if that's not enough? Silence stretched through the room. Isabella looked around the table at faces that had become familiar, Sarah with her technical expertise, Victor with his quiet loyalty, other pack members whose names she'd learned over the past few days. All of them looking to Dante for answers he might not have. There's something else, Victor said carefully. Intelligence suggests Harrison isn't working alone. He has backing, financial, political, technological resources that go beyond what a single federal judge could command.
Who?
That's what we're trying to determine. Shell companies, offshore accounts, encrypted communications. Whoever's supporting him knows how to stay hidden. Isabella felt pieces clicking together in her mind. The investigation into your business dealings. The sophisticated nature of the research. The coordination between federal agencies. Someone with serious resources and long-term planning, Dante agreed. Someone who sees supernatural communities as either a threat to be eliminated or an asset to be controlled. Or both. Sarah looked up from her computers, her expression troubled. I've been monitoring dark web communications, conspiracy forums, hate groups that focus on supernatural entities. There's been a significant increase in activity over the past month. People organizing, sharing information, planning coordinated responses to what they call the revelation. Isabella's blood ran cold. They're preparing for exposure to go public. Some of them are hoping for it, Victor said grimly. They see it as validation of theories they've held for years, as justification for actions they've always wanted to take. The room's secure phone rang with a tone Isabella had learned to fear, urgent, demanding, the sound of crisis escalating beyond their control. Dante answered on the first ring. Speak. The voice that crackled through the speaker was tight with panic. Alpha, we have a situation. The Colorado Pack. They're under attack. The private jet streaked through the night sky at maximum speed, its cabin filled with the kind of tension that preceded violence. Isabella sat across from Dante, watching him coordinate response teams with the efficiency of someone who'd planned for this moment his entire life. The Colorado Pack, 43 members living in a remote valley near Aspen, had gone dark 6 hours ago. No communication, no response to emergency protocols, no sign of life from their territory except satellite imagery showing multiple vehicles and what looked like military-grade equipment. How far out are we? Dante asked the pilot. 20 minutes to Denver. Your people will have ground transport waiting. Isabella studied the tactical maps Victor had spread across the cabin table, noting approach routes, defensive positions, escape corridors. It looked like preparation for a military operation, not a rescue mission. What exactly are we walking into? She asked. Unknown. Dante's voice carried the kind of calm that preceded storms. But Colorado Pack Alpha Marcus Steele is one of the most cautious leaders I know. For him to go completely silent suggests either total communication failure or... He didn't finish the sentence, but Isabella understood. Total annihilation. Why would Harrison move against them first? The Colorado Pack has the highest profile integration with human society, Victor explained. Marcus owns a major construction company, serves on the Aspen City Council, has human business partners who would ask questions if he disappeared, making them both the most visible target and the best test case, Isabella realized. If Harrison can neutralize them without triggering massive investigation, he proves his methods work. And if he can't, then he learns from his mistakes before moving against larger, more dangerous targets. The implication hung in the air like a weapon. Isabella looked around the cabin at faces she'd grown to know over the past week. Pack members who'd accepted her despite the danger she represented, who'd welcomed her into a world that existed in the shadows of the one she'd known. They were flying toward what might be a massacre, and they were bringing her with them. "I shouldn't be here," she said quietly. "I'm not trained for this kind of situation. I'll be a liability." "You're here because we need legal witness to whatever we find," Dante replied. "If Harrison has moved beyond surveillance into direct action, we need someone with official standing to document it. And if it's worse than that? If this is a trap designed to draw you out?" Dante's smile was sharp, predatory, nothing like the gentle expressions she'd grown used to. "Then Judge Harrison is about to learn why werewolf packs have survived for thousands of years while empires rise and fall." The jet began its descent into Denver, and Isabella felt her stomach drop. Precedents and financial settlements. Tonight, she was entering a world where battles were fought with claws and teeth, where victory was measured in survival. She was about to discover what war looked like when the gloves came off. The convoy of black SUVs wound through mountain roads that seemed carved from nightmares, climbing steadily toward a remote valley where silence had replaced life. Isabella sat beside Dante in the lead vehicle, watching him transform from billionaire businessman into something older and infinitely more dangerous. His pale green eyes had taken on an otherworldly glow. His breathing had changed, becoming deeper, more controlled. Even his scent was different. Still expensive cologne and masculine warmth, but now layered with something wild and primal that made her pulse quicken despite her fear. "How much farther?" she asked, needing to break the tense silence. 5 minutes. Dante's voice was rougher than usual, as if speaking required conscious effort. "Isabella, when we arrive, I need you to stay close to Victor. Don't try to help. Don't put yourself at risk. Just observe and document. What are you expecting to find? Bodies." The word was delivered with matter-of-fact brutality. "If we're lucky, evidence of what happened. If we're not lucky..." He didn't finish the sentence, but Isabella could see the answer in his expression. If they weren't lucky, they'd find a trap designed to eliminate Dante and anyone foolish enough to follow him. The vehicles crested a hill, and the Colorado Pack's territory spread below them like a photograph from hell. The buildings were intact, lodge, cabins, workshops scattered through an alpine meadow that should have been beautiful. But there were no lights, no movement, no signs of life. Government vehicles surrounded the perimeter like vultures, and portable floodlights turned the scene into a surreal theater. "Jesus Christ," Victor breathed from the front seat. Dante was already moving, climbing out of the SUV before it had fully stopped. Isabella followed, staying close to Victor as they approached what was clearly a crime scene, or the aftermath of something worse than crime. Federal agents swarmed the area with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Not FBI or U.S. Marshals, but men and women in tactical gear bearing no identifying insignia. Professional soldiers, working for someone with resources to deploy private military contractors. At the center of it all stood Judge Harrison, directing operations with the satisfaction of someone whose plans were proceeding perfectly. "Mr. Volkov," he called out as Dante approached. "Thank you for coming. I was hoping you'd want to see this." "Where are they?" Dante's voice carried dangerous authority, and several of the tactical team shifted nervously. "Safe," Harrison replied with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Relocated to appropriate facilities for their own protection and public safety." "What facilities?" "That's classified. National security matter, you understand." Isabella moved closer, her legal instincts overriding her fear. Around them, the tactical teams continued their work, photographing everything, collecting samples, treating the scene like a research laboratory rather than someone's home. "Judge Harrison," she said, her voice carrying courtroom authority, "under what legal authority have you detained American citizens?" "Under the authority granted by the National Defense Authorization Act, the Patriot Act, and emergency provisions for protecting public safety from exotic biological threats." Exotic biological threats. The bureaucratic language couldn't disguise what Harrison meant. He was treating the Colorado Pack like weapons of mass destruction rather than people. You can't simply disappear American citizens. Can't I? Harrison gestured to his tactical teams, to the federal vehicles, to the absolute control he exercised over the scene. Miss Sterling, you're operating under the assumption that normal constitutional protections apply to non-human entities. That's a generous interpretation that courts have yet to test. The words hit Isabella like physical blows. Harrison wasn't just hunting werewolves. He was preparing legal framework for treating them as non-persons, stripping away rights that had been considered fundamental since the Constitution was written. Where are the children? Dante asked quietly. Children? Harrison's expression was genuinely puzzled. Mr. Volkov, we found no children on this property. Only adult subjects displaying various stages of biological anomaly. Isabella felt ice form in her stomach. The Colorado pack had 17 members under 18, including 3 infants. Marcus Steele's own daughters, aged 6 and 10. Children who should have been sleeping in their beds when the raids began. Marcus mentioned his daughters when we spoke last week, Dante said with dangerous calm. Emma and Sophie. 6 and 10 years old. Blonde hair, blue eyes. They attended Aspen Elementary School. I'm afraid there's been some mistake. Our records show no children at this facility. Harrison was lying. Isabella could see it in his body language, in the slight tension around his eyes. But more than that, she could see something else. Satisfaction. The kind of expression worn by people who'd achieved exactly what they'd hoped to achieve. He hadn't just captured the Colorado pack. He'd made them disappear. Judge Harrison, Isabella said carefully, federal law requires documentation of all detainees, notification of family members, access to legal counsel. Are you saying those requirements don't apply here? I'm saying the requirements don't apply to biological specimens collected for research purposes. The words hung in the air, like a curse. Around them, the tactical teams continued their methodical documentation, but Isabella finally understood what she was witnessing. This wasn't law enforcement, it was specimen collection. Harrison wasn't arresting werewolves, he was harvesting them. You're insane, she whispered. I'm protecting this country from threats most people can't imagine. Harrison moved closer, close enough that Isabella could see the fanatical certainty in his eyes. Do you have any idea what these creatures are capable of? The strength, the speed, the predatory instincts? They're living weapons masquerading as citizens. They're people. They're animals that look like people. And like all dangerous animals, they belong in controlled environments where they can be studied, understood, and prevented from harming innocent civilians. Isabella looked around the scene with new eyes, seeing not law enforcement, but something far worse. The tactical teams weren't just documenting. They were analyzing, collecting biological samples, studying the pack's territory like scientists examining a new species. Harrison wasn't just hunting werewolves. He was preparing to weaponize them. Dante, she said quietly, we need to leave.
Now.
But when she turned, Dante was gone. In his place stood something that made her heart race and her breath catch, still recognizably him, but transformed. His eyes glowed with otherworldly light, his canines had elongated into something that belonged in nightmares, and the air around him crackled with barely contained violence. Judge Harrison, he said, his voice carrying harmonics that resonated in her bones, you've made a serious mistake. Harrison backed away, his tactical teams raising weapons with practiced efficiency. But Isabella could see fear in their movements, could smell the terror that even trained soldiers felt when confronted with apex predators. Mr. Volkov, I'd advise caution. My teams have orders to use lethal force if threatened. Dante's smile revealed teeth that could tear through steel. So do mine. The forest around them erupted into motion, not the mechanical sounds of human movement, but the fluid grace of predators who'd been hunting these mountains since before European settlers arrived. Shapes moved between the trees, too fast to track, too dangerous to ignore. Harrison had walked into a trap of his own making. He'd captured one pack to bait another, but he'd underestimated what happened when werewolf alphas decided diplomacy was no longer an option. Judge Harrison, Dante said with terrifying calm, you have 30 seconds to tell me where my people are. After that, We stop playing by human rules. The countdown had begun, and Isabella realized she was about to witness what happened when apex predators decided that civilization was a luxury they could no longer afford. Chapter 10. Blood Moon Rising. The standoff lasted exactly 30 seconds, long enough for Harrison's tactical team to realize they were surrounded by predators that moved like liquid shadow, short enough that no one could claim they hadn't been warned. Dante's transformation was beautiful and terrifying in equal measure. One moment, he was a man in an expensive suit. The next, he was something that belonged in legends, 7 feet of controlled violence with eyes that glowed like pale green fire and claws that could rend steel. But it was the pack emerging from the forest that made Harrison's soldiers reconsider their career choices. 20 werewolves materialized from the darkness, moving with the fluid coordination of apex predators. Not fully shifted, that would come later if needed, but something between human and wolf that was infinitely more dangerous than either. They surrounded the federal position with tactical precision that made Harrison's military contractors look like weekend paintball enthusiasts. Where are they? Dante's voice carried harmonics that resonated in Isabella's bones, in her blood, in parts of her brain that remembered when humans were prey animals hiding from things that hunted in the dark. Harrison tried to maintain his authority, but sweat beaded on his forehead as his tactical team shifted nervously. Mr. Volkov, you're threatening federal agents in the performance of their duties. The sound that emerged from Dante's throat wasn't quite human, wasn't quite wolf, and was absolutely terrifying. Several of Harrison's soldiers took involuntary steps backward. Victor, Dante said without taking his glowing eyes off Harrison, remind our guests what happens when pack members are taken. Ancient law, Alpha. Victor's voice carried the weight of tradition older than nations. Touch one of ours. Face the judgment of all. And what is that judgment? Blood for blood. Life for life. No mercy, no quarter, no survivors. Isabella watched federal agents who'd probably served in Iraq and Afghanistan look genuinely terrified for the first time in their lives. They were trained to fight human opponents with predictable capabilities and conventional weapons. They had no framework for dealing with creatures that could tear through Kevlar like tissue paper and moved faster than their enhanced combat senses could track. You can't just, Harrison began. Can't what? Dante moved closer. Each step a study in predatory grace. Can't protect my people? Can't enforce territorial law? Can't respond to kidnapping with appropriate force. Those subjects were legally detained. Those children were stolen from their families. Dante's voice dropped to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than shouting. Emma and Sophie Steele. 6 and 10 years old. Where are they, Harrison? I don't know what you're talking about. It was the wrong answer. Dante moved faster than Isabella's human vision could follow, covering the distance between himself and Harrison in a heartbeat. One clawed hand wrapped around the judge's throat with surprising gentleness, firm enough to control, careful enough not to kill.
Yet.
Let me explain something about werewolf pack dynamics, Dante said conversationally, as if he weren't holding a federal judge captive in front of armed agents. We organize around family units. The pack protects the young, the old, the vulnerable. It's not just social structure, it's biological imperative. Harrison tried to speak, but Dante's grip tightened slightly. When you take our children, you trigger responses that evolution embedded in our DNA over thousands of years. Responses that don't recognize human law, federal authority, or political consequences. Dante's pale green eyes began to glow brighter. Responses that end with the complete annihilation of anyone we perceive as threats to our young. Isabella could hear Harrison's tactical team leader speaking urgently into his radio, calling for backup, for air support, for resources that wouldn't arrive in time to matter. Around the perimeter, more wolves emerged from the forest, not just from Dante's pack, but from other territories, other communities that had received the call. An entire coalition of werewolf packs, united by the ancient imperative to protect their children. Judge Harrison, Isabella called out, her legal training finally finding solid ground in the chaos. You have approximately 2 minutes to defuse this situation before it escalates beyond anyone's control. You can, Dante interrupted. And you will. Because the alternative is explaining to your superiors why a simple detention operation resulted in a species war that makes Afghanistan look like a neighborhood dispute. For the first time since Isabella had met him, Judge Harrison looked genuinely afraid. Not just of the immediate physical threat, but of something larger. The realization that he'd miscalculated badly, that his careful plans were crumbling into violence he couldn't control. "The children are safe," he said finally. "Separate facility. Medical evaluation only. Where? I can't reveal classified locations." Dante's grip tightened, and Harrison's words cut off with a strangled gasp. "Victor," Dante said calmly, "how many packs have responded to the call?" 17 so far, Alpha. More arriving every hour. And total numbers? Approximately 400 adults. All volunteer. All very motivated to retrieve the missing children. Isabella watched Harrison's face as the implications sank in. He'd captured one small pack and triggered a mobilization that could reshape the balance of power across the entire continent. 400 werewolves, operating with military precision and supernatural capabilities, focused on a single objective. It was either going to be the shortest war in human history, or the beginning of something that would change the world forever. "Judge Harrison," Isabella said carefully, "I'm going to give you some free legal advice. Whatever authority you think you have, whatever resources you think you can call on, whatever backup plans you've made, none of it matters if the situation goes kinetic." "What do you mean?" "I mean you're about to discover what happens when apex predators decide that human civilization is a failed experiment." Isabella gestured to the wolves surrounding them, to the glowing eyes reflecting back from the forest darkness. "These people have been living peacefully among humans for generations. They've built businesses, raised families, contributed to communities. But you've just reminded them why their ancestors considered humans prey animals." Harrison was silent for a moment, his mind clearly working through possibilities, calculating odds, weighing the cost of different choices. "What do you want?" he asked finally. "Simple." Dante released his throat, but remained close enough to resume the hold if necessary. "Return every member of the Colorado Pack, unharmed and unmodified. Destroy all biological samples you've collected. Cease all surveillance and investigation of supernatural communities." "I can't do that. The national security implications are your problem, not mine." Dante stepped back, giving Harrison space to breathe, but not to escape. "You have 1 hour to produce Marcus Steele and his family. After that, we stop asking politely." "And if I refuse?" Dante's smile was absolutely terrifying. "Then you discover why werewolf packs don't negotiate with people who steal our children." Around them, the tactical teams were growing more nervous by the minute. Professional soldiers were trained to handle human opponents, but the creatures surrounding them defied every assumption about warfare, about biology, about the natural order. Isabella could see the moment when Harrison made his decision, not based on law or authority or political calculation, but on the simple recognition that he was outgunned by opponents who didn't play by human rules. 1 hour, he said finally. "But this doesn't end here. You've just escalated this beyond anything that can be contained quietly." "No," Dante replied with dangerous calm. "You escalated at the moment you decided our children were specimens instead of people." Harrison began speaking into his radio, issuing orders that would hopefully prevent the start of a war that no one could win. But Isabella caught the look in his eyes. Not defeat, but calculation. He was retreating, regrouping, preparing for the next phase of a conflict that was far from over. As the federal teams began their withdrawal, Isabella moved to stand beside Dante, close enough to feel the heat radiating from his transformed body. "This isn't over," she said quietly.
"No."
"It's just beginning." Dante looked down at her, his glowing eyes soft with something that might have been affection. "Are you ready for what comes next?" Isabella thought about the question seriously. She'd built her career on the belief that justice could be achieved through proper channels, that civilization meant something, that law and order were preferable to violence and chaos. But she'd also seen what happened when those institutions failed, when proper channels were corrupted, when civilization was used as a weapon against the innocent. What has come next? War, probably. The kind that reshapes maps and rewrites history books. Dante's transformation was already beginning to reverse, his features becoming more human, though his eyes retained their supernatural glow. The kind where there are no neutral parties and no safe spaces. Isabella looked around at the wolves emerging from the forest, at the tactical precision with which they'd surrounded a federal operation, at the absolute loyalty they showed to their alpha and each other. She thought about 8-year-old Anya, about the families in the photographs, about children who deserved to grow up free instead of being hunted like animals. And she thought about Judge Harrison's face when he'd called them biological specimens, when he'd reduced entire communities to research subjects. "Then I guess we'd better win it," she said. Dante's smile was genuine this time, nothing predatory about it. "Welcome to the war, Solnishko." But even as he spoke, Isabella could see movement in the forest, not more wolves, but something else. Military vehicles, advanced surveillance equipment, resources that suggested Harrison's withdrawal was tactical rather than strategic. The war was starting, and both sides were still choosing their weapons. The only question was how much of the world would be left standing when it was over. Chapter 11. The Reckoning. The Colorado Pack emerged from federal custody like ghosts returning to life, traumatized, furious, and forever changed by their 48 hours in government hands. Marcus Steele, the Pack Alpha, bore visible signs of medical examination. Needle marks, surgical tape, the kind of clinical violations that spoke of scientific curiosity rather than law enforcement. His daughters, Emma and Sophie, clung to their father with the desperate intensity of children who'd learned that the world wasn't safe, that monsters were real, and that some of them wore government badges. Isabella watched the reunion from the edge of the Colorado Pack's territory, her heart breaking at the sight of families torn apart and forcibly reunited. Victor stood beside her, his expression grim as he catalogued the psychological damage that would take years to heal. "They took blood samples from everyone," Marcus reported to Dante, his voice hollow with rage and exhaustion. "Tissue biopsies. Genetic testing. They were particularly interested in the children, measuring responses to stress, documenting developmental stages." "Did they say why?" Dante asked, though Isabella could see he already suspected the answer. "Research." Marcus spat the word like a curse. "They called us subjects the entire time. Not people, not citizens, specimens for a study they claimed was vital to national security." Isabella felt sick. She'd spent her career fighting for justice within the system, believing that law and order meant protection for the innocent. But Harrison had revealed the system's true face, not protection, but predation disguised as authority. "There's something else," Marcus continued. "They weren't working alone. Private contractors, military advisors, scientists from corporations I'd never heard of. This isn't just Harrison's crusade. It's a coordinated operation with serious funding." "How serious?" "Billions. They're building facilities, recruiting personnel, developing what they called containment protocols for supernatural communities nationwide." Marcus looked directly at Dante, his eyes carrying the weight of terrible knowledge. "They're planning to round up every pack in North America." The words settled over the group, like a shroud. Isabella had been thinking in terms of legal battles and political maneuvering, but Harrison was preparing for something far more comprehensive, a systematic campaign to eliminate werewolf communities across the entire continent. "Timeline?" Victor asked. 6 months. Maybe less. Marcus gestured to his daughters, who were playing with other pack children but staying close to adults, never straying far from protective sight. They kept talking about Phase 2 implementation and final solution protocols. Final solution. The historical echoes were unmistakable, and Isabella felt ice form in her stomach as she understood the true scope of Harrison's ambitions. "We need to call a Continental Assembly," Dante said with absolute authority. "Every alpha, every pack leader, every community representative. Full mobilization." "When?" Marcus asked. "Tomorrow night. Full moon." Dante looked around at the assembled wolves, his pale green eyes reflecting moonlight with supernatural intensity. "It's time to stop pretending we can coexist peacefully with people who see us as laboratory specimens." Isabella stepped forward, her legal mind struggling to find alternatives to the violence she could feel building in the air like electricity before a storm.
Wait.
There might be another way. Dante turned to look at her, his expression patient but skeptical. Such as? Exposure. But on our terms, not Harrison's. Isabella pulled out her phone, scrolling through news feeds that had been covering the federal standoff. The media attention from the Colorado raids has been enormous. Public opinion is already questioning federal overreach, particularly regarding indigenous rights. You want to reveal the existence of werewolves to the general public? Victor asked incredulously. I want to control the narrative before Harrison does. Isabella moved to the center of the group, addressing not just Dante but all the pack leaders who'd gathered for the emergency meeting. Right now, you're faceless threats that federal propaganda can demonize. But what if you weren't faceless? What if you were families, communities, people with names and stories and legitimate grievances against government persecution? You're talking about voluntary exposure, Marcus said slowly. Revealing our nature publicly, trusting humans to respond with compassion rather than fear. I'm talking about getting ahead of Harrison's timeline. He's counting on fear, on panic, on the kind of mob mentality that justifies extreme responses. Isabella looked around at faces that had become familiar, at people who'd trusted her with their most dangerous secrets. But fear requires ignorance. If people know who you really are, if they see you as neighbors, as community members, as fellow citizens rather than monsters, it becomes much harder to justify the kind of systematic persecution Harrison is planning. Dante was quiet for a long moment, his enhanced senses no doubt processing information Isabella couldn't detect. Scents, sounds, the emotional states of everyone present. It's never been tried, he said finally. Not on this scale. Not voluntarily. Which is exactly why it might work. Isabella felt the familiar rush of courtroom advocacy, the certainty that came from seeing a path through impossible odds. Harrison's entire strategy depends on secrecy, on fear of the unknown. But what if there's no unknown? What if werewolf communities across North America simultaneously revealed themselves, controlled the narrative, presented themselves as they truly are rather than as government propaganda wants to portray them? And if it backfires? Victor asked. If public reaction is panic rather than acceptance? If exposure leads to vigilante violence against communities that can't protect themselves? Isabella looked at Emma and Sophie Steele, at children who'd already been traumatized by government protection, who would grow up hunted regardless of what choice the adults made today. Then we fight for them with everything we have, she said. But we fight as people defending their families, not as monsters justifying fears. The debate continued through the night, pack leaders arguing passionately for different approaches, some advocating for complete withdrawal from human society, others pushing for the kind of underground resistance that had kept supernatural communities hidden for centuries. But as dawn approached, Isabella could see consensus building around a third option: controlled exposure, coordinated revelation, We'll need media coordination, Sarah said, her technical expertise already working through logistics. Simultaneous press conferences in major cities, social media campaigns, celebrity endorsements from humans who've known about supernatural communities for years. Legal protection, Isabella added. Constitutional challenges to any government response, civil rights legislation, international pressure if federal agencies attempt systematic persecution. And security, Victor concluded grimly. Because no matter how carefully we control the narrative, there will be violent responses from some quarters. We need to be ready to protect our own. Dante listened to the planning with the patience of someone who'd learned that leadership meant weighing impossible choices and living with the consequences. When the discussion finally wound down, he stood and addressed the assembled pack leaders with absolute authority. Continental Assembly meets tomorrow at sunset. Every community sends representatives. We vote on coordinated exposure versus continued secrecy. He paused, his pale green eyes reflecting the morning light. But whatever we decide together. No individual actions that compromise the safety of others. As the meeting dispersed and pack leaders began preparing for travel to the assembly location, Isabella found herself alone with Dante at the edge of the Colorado Territory. The morning sun painted the mountains in shades of gold and rose, beautiful and peaceful despite the violence that had torn through this place just hours before. "Do you really think it will work?" Dante asked quietly. "I think it's our best chance," Isabella replied honestly. "Harrison's counting on fear and ignorance. But humans are capable of more than that, of compassion, of growth, of accepting that the world is bigger and stranger than they imagined." "And if you're wrong?" Isabella thought about the question seriously. If coordinated exposure failed, if public reaction was panic and violence, if Harrison's systematic persecution succeeded, then thousands of innocent people would pay the price for her miscalculation. "Then I'll spend the rest of my life fighting to protect the people who trusted me." Dante's smile was soft, genuine, nothing like the predatory expressions she'd grown used to. That's all anyone can ask. But even as he spoke, Isabella's phone buzzed with an incoming news alert that made her blood run cold. Breaking: federal judge announces formation of Supernatural Threat Assessment Task Force. Congressional hearings scheduled. American people deserve protection from non-human entities operating within our borders. Harrison wasn't waiting for the Continental Assembly or coordinated exposure. He was accelerating his timeline, forcing the werewolf communities into exactly the kind of reactionary position they'd been trying to avoid. "Dante," Isabella said, showing him the news alert. "We're out of time." He read the alert quickly, his expression growing progressively darker. "Then we'd better make sure the Assembly makes the right choice." "And if they don't?" Dante looked out at the mountains where his people had lived in peace for generations, at the forests that would soon become battlegrounds, at the children who deserved better than the war their parents were about to inherit. "Then we fight with everything we have," he said. "And we pray it's enough." The Continental Assembly convened in a hidden valley deep in the Montana wilderness, accessible only through routes known to pack elders and guarded by sentries whose enhanced senses could detect threats miles away. Representatives from 47 supernatural communities gathered under the full moon, their faces grave with the knowledge that the decisions made tonight would reshape the world. Isabella stood at the edge of the sacred circle, the only human present, feeling the weight of responsibility settle on her shoulders like a physical burden. These people had trusted her with their secrets, their safety, their future. Now she was asking them to trust her with their exposure to a world that had proven itself capable of systematic persecution. Dante took his place at the center of the gathering, his presence commanding absolute attention. Even in human form, he radiated the kind of authority that made other alphas defer, that made centuries-old pack leaders listen with respectful silence. "We face a choice that will define the next chapter of our people's history," he began, his voice carrying across the valley without need for amplification. "Remain hidden and face systematic elimination, or reveal ourselves and hope for acceptance." The debate that followed was passionate, sometimes heated, always respectful of the ancient protocols that governed supernatural democracy. Isabella listened to voices that carried the wisdom of generations, to arguments that weighed survival against dignity, safety against freedom. Marcus Steele spoke for exposure, his daughter's traumatized faces fresh evidence of what government protection looked like. An elderly alpha from Alaska argued for deeper secrecy, for withdrawal into wilderness areas where human authority couldn't reach. A pack leader from Florida advocated for selective revelation, trusting certain human allies while maintaining secrecy from the general population. As midnight approached and the full moon reached its zenith, Dante called for the formal vote. 47 voices would decide the fate of thousands, the future of an entire species' relationship with humanity. All in favor of coordinated exposure? Hands rose slowly, carefully, each alpha weighing not just their own community's safety, but the implications for supernatural communities worldwide. Isabella counted. 24 votes for exposure. All opposed. 18 more hands rose, representing communities that chose continued secrecy over the risks of revelation. Abstentions? 5 alphas remained neutral, unwilling to commit their people to either path until circumstances forced their hands. 24 in favor. 18 opposed. 5 abstentions. Coordinated exposure had won by the narrowest possible margin. Then it's decided, Dante announced with the authority of absolute leadership. At dawn on the winter solstice, exactly 1 month from tonight, supernatural communities across North America will simultaneously reveal themselves to human society. We control the narrative. We present ourselves as citizens seeking recognition rather than monsters hiding in shadows. The implications crashed over Isabella like a tidal wave. 1 month to coordinate media strategies, legal protections, security protocols. 1 month to prepare for the most significant revelation in human history. 1 month to get everything right, because there would be no second chances. Judge Harrison will accelerate his timeline, she warned the assembly. Once he realizes what we're planning, he'll try to force chaotic exposure before we're ready. Then we make sure we're ready first, Dante replied with dangerous certainty. And we make sure his version of the truth is buried under ours. As the assembly dispersed and pack leaders began the journey back to their territories, Isabella found herself alone with Dante under the Montana stars. The weight of what they'd just committed to hung between them, a gamble with stakes too high to contemplate. 1 month, she said quietly. 1 month to change the world, Dante agreed. Are you ready? Isabella thought about everything that had led to this moment. Her first meeting with Dante in his Manhattan office, the revelation of his true nature, the growing bond between them that transcended professional partnership. She thought about Judge Harrison's fanatical certainty, about children who deserved better than systematic persecution, about a future where different didn't have to mean dangerous. I've been ready since the moment I walked into your office and decided to fight for justice instead of profit. Dante's smile was devastating, part gratitude, part admiration, part something deeper and more dangerous that made her pulse quicken despite everything else they faced. Then let's give humanity a chance to evolve, he said. And if they don't take it, then we make sure they remember why evolution is the better choice, Isabella finished. 1 month until the world changed forever. 1 month to get everything right. 1 month to prove that love was stronger than fear, that understanding could overcome prejudice, that people, human or otherwise, were worth fighting for. Isabella had faced impossible odds before, but she'd never faced them with a billionaire alpha werewolf who looked at her like she was worth more than his empire. She'd never wanted to win a case more in her life. Chapter 12. Empire of Hearts. 3 weeks later, the war room beneath Volkov Tower had transformed into the nerve center of the most ambitious media campaign in history. Screens displayed coordination feeds from supernatural communities across North America, while Isabella moved between strategy sessions like a general preparing for the battle of her life. 21 days until global revelation. 21 days to control a narrative that would reshape human understanding of the world. And Judge Harrison was running out of patience. He's accelerating again, Sarah reported from her bank of computers, monitoring federal communications with the dedication of someone who understood that lives hung in the balance. Congressional hearings moved up to next week. Emergency funding approved for biological threat containment facilities in 12 states. Isabella studied the intelligence reports while balancing her phone between her shoulder and ear, coordinating legal challenges with civil rights organizations who still didn't know the full scope of what they were protecting. Understood. File the injunctions anyway. Even if they don't hold, they'll slow him down. She ended the call and turned to Dante, who stood at the windows overlooking Manhattan like a king surveying his domain. Harrison's not waiting for the solstice. He's going to force chaotic exposure within days. Then we go early. Dante's voice carried the kind of certainty that had built empires and reshaped continents. Coordinated revelation in 48 hours. Every community, every pack, every supernatural ally we've cultivated. The logistics alone. Our victor's problem. Dante gestured to his security chief, who was already reaching for encrypted phones that would activate plans months in the making. We've been preparing for emergency acceleration since the assembly vote. Everyone knows their roles. Isabella felt the familiar rush of courtroom advocacy combined with something far more personal, the bone-deep certainty that they were fighting for more than legal precedent or political victories. They were fighting for the right of different people to exist without persecution, for love to overcome fear, for the kind of future where children like Anya could grow up free. What about public preparation? Media coordination? We need time to. Solnishko. Dante moved away from the windows, approaching her with the predatory grace that had first caught her attention weeks ago. But now that grace held something else. Tenderness, protectiveness, the kind of focused attention that made her pulse quicken for reasons that had nothing to do with fear. We've done everything we can to control the narrative. Now we trust in something Harrison doesn't understand. Which is the fundamental decency of human nature, the capacity for growth, for acceptance, for choosing hope over fear when given the opportunity. Isabella stared at him, this man who'd revealed himself as something impossible and trusted her with the survival of his people. 3 weeks ago, she'd seen only arrogance in his confidence. Now she recognized it as something far more dangerous and infinitely more attractive, absolute faith in her ability to achieve the impossible. And if human nature disappoints us? Dante's smile was soft, genuine, nothing like the predatory expressions she'd first encountered. Then we face whatever comes together. As partners. As equals. As whatever we choose to become when this is over. The words hung in the air between them, loaded with implications that had been building since their first meeting. Isabella had spent 3 weeks telling herself that their partnership was professional, but Dante looked at her like she was worth more than his empire, spoke to her like her opinion mattered more than his own, protected her like she was precious beyond measure. And somewhere in the chaos of saving the world, Isabella had fallen completely, irrevocably in love with a billionaire alpha werewolf who saw her as an equal rather than a conquest. Dante, she said quietly, when this is over. The secure phone's emergency tone cut through the moment like a blade. Victor answered with sharp efficiency, his expression growing progressively darker as he listened to whoever was reporting. Alpha, we have a problem. Harrison's moved against the Manhattan Pack. Isabella felt ice form in her stomach. The Manhattan Pack, 37 werewolves living integrated lives throughout the 5 boroughs, including families with young children, elderly pack members who'd called New York home for decades. Details, Dante commanded, his voice carrying dangerous authority. Federal raids on 6 locations simultaneously. Pack members detained for biological threat assessment. But Alpha. Victor paused, clearly struggling with information he didn't want to deliver. They took Anya. The words hit Isabella like a physical blow. Anya, 8 years old, Dante's niece, the little girl whose photograph had convinced Isabella that some battles had to be fought regardless of the cost. Dante went completely still, and Isabella felt the temperature in the room drop as if winter had arrived early. When he spoke, his voice carried harmonics that resonated in her bones, in her blood, in parts of her brain that remembered when humans were prey. Where is she? Unknown. But Alpha, there's something else. Harrison called a press conference for tonight. He's planning to reveal everything. Werewolf existence, pack locations, the complete breakdown of supernatural communities nationwide. He's going to use Anya as proof that these biological weapons pose a threat to innocent children. Isabella's legal mind raced through the implications. Harrison was brilliant, she had to admit. By taking a werewolf child, he could present himself as protecting innocent human children from supernatural predators. The narrative would write itself. Brave federal judge exposes hidden monsters masquerading as citizens. Victor, full pack mobilization. Every ally, every resource, every favor we can call in. Dante was already moving toward the weapons cabinet that Isabella hadn't known existed behind the conference room's wood paneling. Sarah, coordinate with the other territories. If Harrison forces exposure tonight, we need to be ready with our own simultaneous revelation. And if we can't find Anya in time? Isabella asked, though she dreaded the answer. Dante paused in loading ammunition that looked distinctly non-standard into weapons that seemed designed for supernatural warfare. Then Judge Harrison discovers what happens when someone threatens an Alpha's family. The promise carried weight that made Isabella's pulse quicken and her blood run cold in equal measure. She'd seen Dante as a businessman, as a leader, as a protective alpha. But the man preparing for war was something older and infinitely more dangerous, a predator whose patience had finally run out. "I'm coming with you," she said. "Absolutely not. She's not just your niece, Dante. She's become mine too." Isabella moved to stand directly in front of him, close enough to see the gold flecks in his pale green eyes, close enough to smell the scent that had become as familiar as her own. "You trusted me to help save your people. Trust me to help save your family. Isabella, what I'm about to do, it won't be legal. It won't be civilized. It will be war. Then wage it." Isabella reached up to touch his face, feeling the barely controlled violence beneath his human facade. "But don't wage it alone." For a moment, Dante's carefully constructed control cracked, and Isabella saw something raw and vulnerable underneath. Not the alpha who commanded respect through strength, but the man who'd lost his brother and sister-in-law, who'd taken responsibility for an orphan child, who carried the weight of protecting everyone he loved. "I can't lose her," he whispered. "She's all the family I have left. You won't lose her." Isabella stood on her toes to press her forehead against his, drawing strength from the contact, offering what comfort she could. "And you won't lose me either. We're partners, remember? In everything." Dante's arms came around her then, crushing her against his chest with desperate intensity. For a heartbeat, they weren't alpha and lawyer, predator and prey, supernatural and human. They were just two people who'd found something worth fighting for in each other. "Together," he asked against her hair. "Together," Isabella confirmed. "Now, let's go get our daughter back." Harrison's press conference was scheduled for 8 p.m. at Federal Plaza, with media coverage that would reach every major network and streaming platform. But by 7:30, the story had already broken in ways he'd never anticipated. Across North America, supernatural communities began simultaneous revelation events that turned Harrison's narrative inside out. Pack leaders appeared on local news stations, not as captured specimens, but as community leaders, business owners, neighbors who'd been living peacefully among humans for generations. The Manhattan Pack's detention became not evidence of government protection, but proof of systematic persecution of innocent families. And in the chaos of coordinated exposure, a single black SUV approached the federal building where 8-year-old Anya Volkov was being held as evidence of supernatural threat. Isabella sat in the passenger seat, wearing tactical gear that Victor had insisted she needed, her heart racing with adrenaline and terror in equal measure. Through the encrypted radio, she could hear reports from other teams, Pack members positioned around the building, legal observers documenting federal overreach, media allies ready to broadcast whatever they found. "Target building, 2 minutes out," Victor reported from the driver's seat. "Security assessment?" Dante asked from the back seat, his voice carrying the kind of calm that preceded storms. "Minimal." Harrison's pulled most of his resources for the press conference. Buildings being held by contract security and maybe 6 federal agents. "Lethal force authorization?" Isabella turned to stare at Dante, seeing something in his pale green eyes that she'd never witnessed before, not anger or even rage, but the cold certainty of someone who decided that some lines couldn't be crossed without consequences. "Only if necessary," she said quickly. "We're here to rescue Anya, not start a war." Solnishko. They took my 8-year-old niece to use as a prop in a press conference designed to justify the systematic persecution of my people. Dante's voice was perfectly calm, perfectly controlled, and absolutely terrifying. The war started the moment they touched her. The SUV pulled into an alley beside the federal building, and Isabella could see lights from the press conference setup bleeding through windows 50 floors above. Harrison was probably preparing his final remarks, rehearsing the revelation that would change everything. He had no idea that change was coming for him. "Teams in position," Victor reported. "Building secured. 6 agents neutralized non-lethally. Anya's location confirmed, 32nd floor, medical examination suite." Medical examination? Isabella felt sick thinking about what an 8-year-old had been subjected to in the name of federal research. "Standard biological threat assessment," Victor said grimly. "Blood work, tissue samples, stress response testing." Dante was moving before Victor finished talking, flowing out of the SUV with liquid grace. Isabella followed, her legal training warring with maternal instincts she had known she possessed. Anya wasn't her biological child, but she'd become something more important: family chosen rather than born, responsibility accepted rather than inherited. The elevator ride to the 32nd floor passed in tense silence, broken only by Victor's quiet coordination with other teams. Isabella watched the floor numbers climb, each one bringing them closer to a confrontation that would define everything that came after. The doors opened to reveal a sterile hallway lined with medical equipment and monitoring stations. At the far end, behind reinforced glass, Isabella could see a small figure sitting on an examination table, dark hair, pale green eyes, the kind of quiet dignity that suggested she was her uncle's niece in more than just genetics. Anya looked up as they approached, and her face transformed with relief and joy that made Isabella's chest tight with emotion. "Uncle Dante, I'm here, Malishka." Dante's voice was infinitely gentle as Victor worked on the electronic locks. "Are you hurt?" They took blood and pictures, and they asked lots of questions about our family. Anya's voice was steady, but Isabella could see the fear underneath her composure. "I didn't tell them anything important." "Good girl." The locks disengaged with a soft click, and Dante swept his niece into his arms with desperate relief. "You're safe now, I promise." Isabella watched the reunion, her heart breaking and soaring in equal measure. This was what they were fighting for, not abstract principles or political victories, but the right of families to exist without persecution, the safety of children who deserved better than being treated as laboratory specimens. "We need to move," Victor said quietly. "Harrison's press conference starts in 15 minutes. If we're not clear before then..." "Before then what?" a familiar voice asked from behind them. Isabella turned to see Judge Harrison emerging from a side office, flanked by 6 federal agents who looked distinctly uncomfortable with their current assignment. "Judge Harrison," she said, stepping partially in front of Dante and Anya. "This detention is illegal under federal law, constitutional protection, and basic human decency." "Is it?" Harrison's smile was coldly satisfied. "Miss Sterling, you're harboring a biological weapon that poses a clear and present danger to national security. I'm afraid you're all under arrest." "On what charges?" "Conspiracy to harbor non-human entities, obstruction of federal investigation, aiding and abetting enemies of the state." Enemies of the state. The phrase hung in the air like a weapon, revealing the true scope of Harrison's intentions. He wasn't just persecuting werewolves, he was redefining them as foreign threats, stripping away citizenship rights that had been considered fundamental since the Constitution was written. "Judge Harrison," Isabella said with courtroom authority, "you're about to make the biggest mistake of your career." "Am I?" "Because from where I stand, I'm about to become the man who saved America from hidden monsters." Harrison gestured to his agents, who reluctantly began moving forward. "Take them into custody. All of them." It was the wrong decision. Dante handed Anya to Isabella with gentle care, then turned to face the federal agents with something that was no longer entirely human. His transformation was subtle but unmistakable: eyes that glowed with otherworldly light, canines that elongated into something predatory, presence that filled the hallway with barely contained violence. "Gentlemen," he said with terrifying calm, "I strongly advise you to reconsider your current course of action." The federal agents looked at their weapons, looked at Dante, looked at each other with the kind of uncertainty that suggested they'd signed up to arrest white-collar criminals, not apex predators. "Stand down," their team leader said quietly. "This is beyond our operational parameters." "Agent Morrison, you have direct orders," Harrison began. "Judge Harrison, with respect, I have 6 agents and limited ammunition facing what appears to be a biological weapon of unknown capabilities in a confined space. I'm not sacrificing my people for your press conference." Isabella felt a surge of respect for Agent Morrison, who'd clearly decided that discretion was the better part of survival. She also felt Anya's small hand slip into hers, trusting and warm and absolutely precious. "This isn't over," Harrison said, backing toward the elevator. Morrison, call for backup. Military support. Whatever it takes to contain this situation. Actually, Isabella said with a kind of satisfaction that came from perfect timing, I think you'll find that situation has already changed significantly. She gestured toward the windows, where the lights of Harrison's press conference were clearly visible. But instead of the controlled revelation he'd planned, the screens were showing something entirely different. Coordinated press conferences from supernatural communities across the continent, pack leaders speaking calmly about their lives, their families, their contributions to human society. While you were busy playing with illegal detention and medical experiments, Isabella continued, 47 supernatural communities simultaneously revealed themselves to the media. They're not hiding anymore, Judge Harrison. They're standing up to be counted as citizens seeking recognition rather than monsters hiding in shadows. Harrison stared at the screens, his face cycling through emotions, surprise, rage, and finally the cold calculation of someone whose plans had been completely upended. This changes nothing. If anything, it proves the scope of the threat. It proves that you're a corrupt federal judge who's been systematically persecuting American citizens based on biological differences. Isabella stepped closer, using every inch of her height and every ounce of her courtroom presence. And by tomorrow morning, every major news outlet in the country will have documentation of your illegal detention of an 8-year-old child for use as a political prop. You can't prove. Can I? Isabella pulled out her phone, showing him video footage that Victor had been live streaming since they'd entered the building. Funny thing about modern technology, Judge Harrison. Everything gets recorded. Everything gets broadcast. Everything gets preserved for congressional hearings and federal investigations. For the first time since Isabella had known him, Judge Harrison looked genuinely afraid, not of physical threat, but of something far more dangerous to a man of his ambitions, complete and total exposure of his corruption. This isn't over, he said finally, retreating toward the elevator with what remained of his dignity. No, Dante agreed, his voice carrying the kind of promise that made federal agents nervous. It's just beginning. But as the elevator doors closed behind Harrison and his remaining agents, Isabella felt something shift in the air. Not victory, exactly, but the sense that they'd survived the opening battle of a much larger war. Anya was safe. The revelation was proceeding according to plan. And for the first time in weeks, Isabella allowed herself to believe that they might actually win. Is it over? Anya asked quietly, her small hand still clutched in Isabella's. The scary part is, Isabella replied, looking down at pale green eyes that held wisdom beyond her years. Now, comes the interesting part. Dante's laugh was rich and genuine, nothing predatory about it. Welcome to our new world, Solnishko. I hope you're ready for what comes next. Isabella looked at the man she'd fallen in love with, at the child who'd become more precious than her own life, at the future spreading before them, like an unwritten story. With you too? I'm ready for anything. 6 months later, the penthouse office that had once served as Dante's corporate fortress had been transformed into something warmer, more personal, still sophisticated, still powerful, but now decorated with family photographs and children's artwork alongside priceless art and business awards. Isabella stood at the floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park, watching Anya play with other pack children in the green space below. The sight would have been impossible 6 months ago. Werewolf children playing openly in public parks, their nature no longer a secret that required constant vigilance. The revelation had gone better than anyone had dared hope. Not perfectly, there had been protests, violence, congressional hearings that lasted months. But the coordinated exposure had worked exactly as Isabella had predicted, controlling the narrative and presenting supernatural communities as families rather than threats. Judge Harrison had been stripped of his federal appointment and was currently facing criminal charges for illegal detention, violation of civil rights, and corruption dating back to his involvement with Meridian Development. His biological threat containment facilities had been shut down, their victims released and compensated by federal settlement. More importantly, the Supernatural Citizens Act had passed Congress just last month, granting full legal recognition and constitutional protection to werewolf communities nationwide. Brooding about legal briefs? Dante asked, approaching from his desk where he'd been reviewing the quarterly reports for Volkov Industries, which now included a supernatural rights advocacy division that Isabella had convinced him to fund. Brooding about how much the world has changed, Isabella leaned back against his chest, drawing comfort from his warmth and strength. 6 months ago, you were my enemy.
Now.
Isabella turned in his arms, looking up at pale green eyes that still made her pulse quicken, but no longer with fear. Now you're my partner in everything that matters. Dante's smile was devastating, full of love and promise, and the kind of future she'd never allowed herself to imagine. Is that a legal opinion, counselor? That's a personal one. Isabella stood on her toes to kiss him, tasting certainty and commitment and the kind of happiness that came from finding someone worth fighting for. Though I should probably make it official soon. Official how? Instead of answering, Isabella reached into her jacket pocket and withdrew a document that had taken her weeks to prepare. Not a legal brief or court filing, but something far more important. Adoption papers, she said quietly. For Anya. If you'll have me as a co-parent, as a partner, as whatever we decide to become. Dante stared at the documents, his expression cycling through surprise, joy, and something deeper that made her heart race. When he looked up, his eyes held the kind of love that reshaped worlds. Solnishko, are you proposing to me? I'm proposing that we build something permanent together. A family, a future, a love that's stronger than fear. Isabella felt tears threatening, but they were happy tears, hopeful tears, the kind that came from believing in impossible things. What do you say, Alpha? Ready to be claimed by a human lawyer who's stubborn enough to argue with federal judges. Dante's laugh was rich and joyful, carrying none of the dangerous edge she'd first encountered. I've been claimed since the moment you walked into my office and threatened to destroy my empire. And now I'm claiming you back. Dante swept her into his arms, spinning her around the office that had witnessed their first meeting, their partnership, their evolution from enemies to allies to something infinitely more precious. Forever, Solnishko. In all the ways that matter. Through the windows, Isabella could see Anya looking up at their office, waving with a kind of innocent joy that suggested she already knew she was about to gain an official mother to go with her uncle Dante. The world had changed. Supernatural communities were no longer hidden. And Isabella Sterling had found her place in an empire built not on money or power, but on love and family and the absolute certainty that some things were worth fighting for. She'd walked into Dante Volkov's office planning to destroy his business empire. Instead, she'd helped him build something far more valuable, a future where different didn't mean dangerous, where love conquered fear, and where children like Anya could grow up free to be exactly who they were meant to be. It was the most important case she'd ever won.
The end.